It's not a lie. It's the truth. Do you like a good steering wheel that doesn't fly off while you're driving? Well, I want it to like detach sometimes, but then I want it to be able to reattach. Otherwise, I'd have to keep buying steering wheels, and I don't want to like prop up an industry
Testing.
Tongue twister contest with Lactoid. I would crush Lactoid in the tongue twister contest. I literally won Teddy's tongue twister contest in her server. You would get destroyed. You want to test this right now, Lactoid?
What tongue twister?
I mean, just anything. We can pull a list off the internet.
Well, hold on. What? First of all, how's my volume? Am I good?
It's beautiful. You're beautiful.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Classic Peter Piper one? Do you like that one? That one's super easy.
I don't care. I'll beat you in any of them. I just need to see the text.
Go ahead.
Well, I don't know what it is. Paste it.
You don't know the Peter Piper
one? You just mean Peter Piper picked the pep of whatever. I don't know what it fucking is.
Yeah, you already fucked it up. You've demonstrated
I don't know what it
knowledge.
Is.
You've demonstrated no knowledge in like the most basic of tongue twisters. Crazy.
Does it count?
So I already won that one. How about
you did not? You're trying to.
Say, yeah. Say toy boat. Say that 10 times fast. Go ahead.
Toy boat, 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 toy boat.
That's pretty good.
Thank you.
I think pretty good.
Okay, here we go.
She sells seashells by the seashore.
I got this. I put this in the chat. Are you ready? I will even go first because I think I'll beat you. You see the link I just sent?
Yeah, give me a second.
I have a stopwatch. I just opened it up. Are you ready? By the way, I'm like 3 drinks in, so like you're gonna lose to me when I'm not even fully sober.
Right. So, it starts with a Peter Piper one. Incredible. The very first one.
Yeah. I'm reading the whole thing. You ready?
Have fun. Good luck.
Okay, here we go. All right. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. Did Peter Piper pick a peck of pickled peppers? Did Peter Piper pick a peck of pickled peppers? Where are the peck of pickled peppers? Peter Piper picked seashells by the seashore. The she sells are surely seashells. So if she sells seashells on the seashore, I'm sure she sells seashore shells. How much wood could a woodchuck chuck? Woodchuck wood. He would chuck wood as much as he could and chuck as much wood as a woodchuck would. If a woodchuck would, a big black bug bit a big black bear, made the big black bear be blood. Betty Butter had some butter, but she said this butter's bitter. If I baked this bitter butter, it would make my better bitter. But a lot of better butter, that would make my batter better. So she bought a bit of butter better than her better butter, and she baked it in her batter, and the batter was not bitter. So twas better Betty bought a bit of better butter. 32 seconds. Ready?
Duke, this is a talent I didn't know you had. This is pretty fucking impressive. I was following along.
I warned you.
Yeah, no,
ready?
I will. First of all, before I go ahead, I'll just go ahead and concede defeat. Okay, this is.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. I will. I thought we were gonna go like one by one, but that was very impressive. Incredible.
Thank you. All right. Well, that was a great call for Redbeard. I appreciate that. That was fun.
Hey, how you guys doing?
We're doing good. We're chilling. It's a Tuesday night. We're having fun.
Right on.
We're all being here, and let's now we got this stall out of the way. Let's get into the debate here. Let me get Craig going up here on the recording. Thank you guys for joining for another week of Everyday Debates. Today we've got a weekday debate, excuse me. And we have Lactoid and Redbeard, who are going to be taking a bit of a break from Israel-Palestine. In fact, whoever mentions either of those countries/territories will be the instant loser of the debate if they ever say those words.
Thank Allah.
So today we're going to pretend the entire issue doesn't even exist. It's cleared out of our minds. And today we're going to debate Marxist socialism, whether or not Marxist socialism is good for the world. And specifically, we're going to break this into a 2-part structure so that we don't cross streams too much, like we're back in 3rd grade. It's 2 boys. And so we're going to do part one. We're essentially going to debate the topic of whether or not 20th century Marxism, socialism was on net beneficial to the world. And then we're going to do a part two, and we're going to debate whether or not Marxist socialist policies would help the world today. Other than that, we're going to follow the same structure as we always do with our 4-minute opening statements. So we'll start on our part one here. And of course, we have Redbeard defending the merits of Marxist socialism, and we have Lactoid against the merits of Marxist socialism. So we'll start with part one for around 45 minutes or so, which again is 20th century Marxist socialism was on net beneficial to the world. And let's have the pro side go first. So Redbeard, you have about 4 minutes to make your case. Go ahead.
All right, thank you. And thank you all for attending. I hope everything's going great with you guys. So here we go. All right. So Marxism is an ideology that deserves credit for its merits in addressing the inequality, exploitation, and the class struggles in human societies. Marxism highlights the contradictions and flaws of capitalism, shedding light on the exploitation of the working class by what is known as the bourgeoisie or the capitalist class. Okay. Marxism also emphasizes the importance of social and economic equality, offering a vision for a future society where wealth and resources are distributed equitably, if not perfectly equally, then equitably or fairly. And Marxism also provides a comprehensive analysis of historical materialism, allowing us to understand societal progress and envision a path towards a more just and inclusive society. So there's three major sections that I would go at. So Marxism focuses on the surface level. The most obvious and apparent points it makes are in regards of exploitation and inequality. Capitalism has an inherent tendency to create and perpetuate social and economic inequality. Capitalism is driven by profit motives, which often leads to the exploitation of the workers. Okay, Marxist theory argues that the labor theory of value, wherein the value of a good or service is determined by the socially necessary labor required to produce it, demonstrates how capitalists appropriate surplus value or profits from the labor of their workers. By recognizing this exploitation, Marxism provides a framework for addressing income inequality and striving towards a more equitable distribution of wealth. And on the more philosophical side, Marxism's historical materialism allows us to understand societal progress through an analysis of class struggle through history. It acknowledges that societal change is often driven by conflicts arising from the contradictions within the existing economic system. By recognizing the historical context and the material conditions that shape society, Marxism offers a path towards a future that prioritizes social and economic justice. Through the collective ownership of the means of production, Marx envisions a society where all members have access to the resources and opportunities needed to flourish, reducing exploitation and inequality. How much time do I have left?
You have about a minute left.
Okay, so in conclusion, Marxism provides a compelling framework for understanding and addressing the flaws of capitalism. Its critique of exploitation and inequality, coupled with the analysis of historical materialism, offers essential tools for envisioning a more just and equitable society. While Marxism and the practice of Marxism in real life has had shortcomings, its merits lie in its ability to shed light on the inherent contradictions of capitalism and advocate for a future where resources and power are distributed more fairly.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the introduction.
Yeah, 4 minutes.
Yeah, so Marxian socialism can be viewed as either a prescription to maximize some sort of normative goal like equity or workers' rights, or as a economic theory. As a economic theory, Marxism has been widely discredited, and even modern day quote unquote Marxists have had to revise most, if not all, of Marxist methods in order to call themselves economists. Subjective value theory is the mainstream for most economists, and no serious economist rejects this. As to Marxism's normative goals, I will argue that its theories and applications have been overall bad for most societies by most standards, or, shortcomings, as we just heard Redbeard say. Firstly, Marxism is morally evil. It claims to support a kind of moral labor theory of ownership, such that people get the products of their labor, but then immediately contradicts this with their actions. Instead of Marxist-oriented countries providing individuals with the product of their labor, Marxist societies set crippling rules on ownership that reject this concept, and instead redistribute goods for either equity purposes or to increase the power of the state. Now, if the effect of this was some sort of economic boom or hedonistic utopia, the coldest of utilitarians could perhaps argue that it's worth it. But this is not what we see. Market-oriented countries have overall outperformed Marxist-oriented countries in most economic metrics, and especially the important ones. These metrics include overall GDP, GDP growth, pollution generated per unit of GDP, disposable income, higher efficiency in GDP production, and economic sustainability. Then we have to analyze the more direct moral effects of Marxism. Marxism engineering projects cause widespread atrocities and death. David Kopel with Reason Magazine estimates that just under 213 million people were murdered by Marxist regimes in the 20th century alone, with more mainstream sources placing it at around 100 million. I'm perfectly willing to accept 100 million. 100 million is still fucking terrible. Marxism is strongly correlated with authoritarian regimes. Look across the world and give me a single self-described Marxist country in the 20th century that you believe ranks or ranked highly in civic liberties. Marxist countries overwhelmingly were and are totalitarian dictatorships or one-party states, with very little civil freedoms, no freedom of speech or protest, and little to no democracy. Overall, the empirical outcome of these experiments appears to show a poor prognosis, lots of lost freedom, and little to no results to show for it.
All right. Well, with the opening statements out of the way, let's just get into a back and forth for about 45 minutes or so. So Redbeard, if you got something you want to reply to, go for it.
So in terms of Marxism and countries that have adopted Marxism as their primary philosophy, you could say. Okay, so where to start? So the first nation in the world to legalize first trimester abortions was actually Soviet Russia. And also Soviet Russia gave women the right to vote years before the United States or England did, at least a couple years before. It happened around the same time. So in terms of moral evilness, I mean, I don't know, if you think that increasing opportunities for marginalized groups is evil, then I suppose you have the right to believe that. But yeah, I don't know. I reject the theory that any economic or political philosophy is inherently evil by itself. I wouldn't even say that capitalism is inherently evil, even though genocides and racist, chauvinist policies have been enacted by many countries that are capitalist. It's the main message is the path of historical progress, which I believe is the primary factor I would look at, rather than a subjective view of the morality of whatever system you advocate for.
Okay, a couple things. When you talk about a subjective view of morality, that is sort of what you were appealing to when you spoke about the women's right to vote and first trimester abortion. One thing I think to clarify, in the Soviet Union, given that it was a totalitarian country, dictatorship, during the Stalin era, and then post-Stalin, it was a one-party state. What could women vote for?
Well, women had the right to become educated and to take place in public political life for the first time in Russian history during and after the Russian Revolution. Before the Russian Revolution, women were marginalized politically and socially in Russian society. And same thing with Jews and other national groups that were living in Russia. So socialism and the Russian Revolution basically gave these groups an opportunity to advocate for themselves, which I view as morally good myself. And I'm not going to really stick my neck out and defend most of what Stalin did himself. I myself am not a Stalinist. I'm not a Stalin advocate. The way that they went about putting together the planned economy was rife with systematic problems. However, that doesn't invalidate the Russian Revolution itself, in my opinion. I mean, the French Revolution had shortcomings, ended up with Napoleon in charge of France for a long time. So if you want to look at it that way, I'll let you talk now.
Oh, sure, that's fine. So you brought this up again, right? You brought, first of all, women have the right to vote, and you talk about people advocating for themselves. Again, like on every metric, the Soviet Union was less democratic than any of the capitalist world, right? I mean, it was a totalitarian dictatorship under Stalin, but even after Stalin, it was still a one-party authoritarian state that didn't allow other parties, didn't allow people to advocate for themselves, and didn't allow freedom of speech or political advocacy or protests or any of this. So again, I guess what's the benefit of giving someone the right to vote in a system that doesn't allow voting for anything like important or anything relevant?
Okay, so yeah, in terms of Stalin, I would really argue that a lot of what Stalin believed was antithetical to what Marx and Lenin advocated for in their lives. Stalin was himself a racist, sexist, chauvinist. I'll be the first to admit this. Okay, and he murdered Trotsky. He murdered the majority of the founding members of the Bolshevik Party, actually. So the history of the Soviet Union is a complex thing, especially considering the Russian Civil War, and the subsequent isolation of Russia during and after the Civil War, which unfortunately led to a one-party state. However, if you look at this in the view of historical context, it makes a lot more sense, and looking at it through a moral lens, trying to apply our present day moral standards to how they lived back then. That is my view.
Well, no, I'm not applying I'm not applying current. I agree with you. I'm not applying current standards to the Soviet Union then. I'm applying the standards of the Soviet Union then that was applicable to the rest of the world, right? So when you compare the Soviet Union to other countries, right, it was dramatically less democratic. It stomped down on civil liberties dramatically more than really anywhere else. And you bring up first trimester abortion being legalized in the Soviet Union. I guess on the scale of freedom, and by the way, I'm not counting fetuses in that 100 million deaths from communism or Marxism. In the scales of freedom here, I mean, on one hand, we have being able to protest and have freedom of speech and freedom of elections and et cetera, et cetera. And on the other hand, you have, I guess, a little bit earlier first trimester abortions. I mean, can you at least agree with me that there seems to be more civic freedoms on one side than the other?
Well, also considering at the time that there was still legal segregation in the United States and in many countries that were colonies of Britain and France. Considering at the time that most of the world were actually colonies of European countries, and considering that a lot of countries, especially the United States, had racially motivated laws that it kind of makes you ask, was the United States really a democracy before black people had the right to vote?
The United States was more of a democracy throughout the entire history of the Soviet Union than the Soviet Union ever was. Pick any point. You pick any point during the Soviet Union's existence, there are more people in America, a higher percentage of them could vote than in the Soviet Union in terms of voting for anything meaningful.
a higher percentage of people had the right to vote in America than in the Soviet Union. That's not correct. There was universal suffrage for the right to vote in
For what?
Soviet Russia.
What could they vote for?
I know it became a one-party state. I know, and you have to look at the historical context to really find out why that happened. But essentially, when the Russian Revolution happened, it was during World War I. The Russian army and the Russian people wanted an end to the war, and fundamentally, that's why they put Lenin and the Bolsheviks in charge. Lenin and the Bolsheviks did not expect a massive civil war to break out when they tried signing peace with Germany and when they tried doing an equitable land distribution, tried to basically end poverty and provide a path for opportunities and freedom for people in the Russian Empire at the time. That's the context. That's why people put them in power in the first place. That's why they put the communists in power in Russia. The Soviets, the workers' councils, had universal suffrage rights, and the Bolsheviks weren't the only parties in the Soviets. That changed throughout the Civil War due to a variety of reasons. Part of some of the parties tried to assassinate Lenin when after the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, for example. Some of the other parties in the Soviets, some of the parties in the Duma, which existed, tried to sabotage peace efforts with Germany. So on that basis, Lenin had a mandate for peace, which is how he got voted into the Soviets, along with the and they had a coalition with what we call the Left Socialist Revolution, which was like a left populist party at the time, who worked together to do the October Revolution itself, because at the time, the vast majority of Russians were peasants living in basically a debt-enforced servitude to their landlords. So if you look at the actual historical context, it makes sense why the Bolsheviks were able to rise to power in Russia, considering what was going on with World War I, considering what was going on with the general medieval, semi-medieval nature of Russia at the time, basically. Like, it might make more sense if you kind of view it that way. Does that make sense at all?
I guess the confusion I'm having is like, leaving the history of the Russian Revolution aside for a second. You know, some of the things you pointed to with, I guess, the civic freedom nature of the Soviet Union were things like women's right to vote and abortion. And then, you know, I asked you, well, you know, vote for what? And it appears you somewhat concede, yeah, it's a totalitarian country or a one-party state, and there was no meaningful democracy, and there was no meaningful civil rights, and you know, the Soviet Union, like the Marxist government, stamped down on civil liberties, right? And so, like, way more than the U.S. government stamped down on civil liberties within the U.S. I mean, we can move on to like economic metrics. I have links on those, but I mean,
well, the United States government itself. Okay, so at the time of the Russian Revolution, the Ku Klux Klan was alive and well in the United States. There were lynchings every year, and a mass intimidation towards people of color to keep them out of politics at the time. So if you're trying to argue the United States was really more progressive at the time, I would say no, honestly. Like, we had a terroristic, racially motivated millions of people who bought into this ideology of the United States at the time. And in Russia, you had a huge amount of people who were interested in anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, who were involved in basically terroristic violence and pogroms especially against the Jewish population of the Russian Empire, many of whom saw communism and socialism as their path to liberation, as their path to freedom, instead of being segregated from the world by the Russian state.
Okay, I guess a comment and then a question. I guess the first comment is, I mean, I don't know personally if I'm not going to defend the Klan, but I don't think the fact that the Klan exists necessarily, again, on the scale of civic liberties, was so sufficient that it removed the political power of black people to be equal to the average Soviet citizen who had no political power. And then my second question is in terms of like treatment of minorities. So there's some arguments that the Soviet Union didn't really treat minorities all that great. I mean,
I know
are you familiar?
Yeah, I know you're right. Yeah, I know. Yeah, you're right. I know.
Okay, sure, right. So like,
I get what you're gonna say. Yeah.
Yeah. The Holodomor, I think, is kind of where
Yeah, I
I'm
know,
going
and that all of that totally happened. I'm not a Holodomor denier, like a lot of Stalinists are. I'm not going to deny the atrocities that happened under his regime. A lot of horrible stuff happened, but I would say that really what Stalin did was antithetical to what Lenin and Marx would have advocated for, and proof of this is when Stalin did the Great Purge and executed the majority of leading Russian, Soviet, communists during his regime. Over 500,000 people who he sentenced to political prisons and gulags for advocating for the rights of minorities and for the rights of women and for human rights in Russia. Stalin claimed that his actions were in line with Lenin and Marx. However, I highly disagree with that myself.
Okay. So leaving, okay, I'll take concession at a time. Stalin was horrible, and the Soviet Union during the Stalin era was horribly awful and was an overall net negative for the Russian people and the world. Can we agree with that?
It was a net negative for communism and Marxism, and it was a net negative for. I mean, they won World War II. I mean, they fought on our side in World War II. So if you want to look at it that way, if you want to look at what really net positive or net negative, would we have been able to defeat Nazi Germany without the Soviet Union? I sort of doubt it.
Okay, so
I specifically
asked about Stalin.
Yeah,
specifically
historically, and he was in charge during World War II.
I understand he was in charge. But like you just condemned like the Stalinist era as being like horrible for civil liberties.
I condemn Stalinist politics. Yeah, I condemn his political and social beliefs generally. Yeah, but in terms of the Soviet Union itself being a historical net negative for humanity.
Can I ask?
That's a more gray area. It really depends. I don't know. It really depends, honestly.
Yeah, I mean,
I would say no.
Would you credit
it's at least neutral or a net positive?
Would you credit communism with like specifically communism or Marxism as the reason why the Soviet Union was able to beat Nazi Germany?
Well, they had a planned economy at the time, and they had and the rapid industrialization of the Soviet Union. Which enabled them to outproduce Germany and outproduce the Axis, being able to build more rifles and tanks, etc., and to field these weapons into battle would not have been possible without the rapid industrialization that happened under Stalin yeah. So it's really you know I don't know. I would say that it is a net positive that we were allies with the Soviet Union during World War II, and we did the Lend-Lease Act. We helped them in their fight against the Nazis.
Those tanks and rifles.
That is a net positive.
Those tanks and rifles, a lot of them came from capitalist countries, didn't they?
I think about 15 to 25% of their supplies after 1943. Were imported from capitalist countries. However, they did produce like a lot of stuff in Russia itself. Okay. Undoubtedly.
Sure.
The vast majority of it was produced in Russia.
Can I ask why I apparently have to ask this. Why was the Stalinist policy, specifically as regards like the Holodomor and expropriating the products of labor from the Ukrainian people there to the industrial heartland, why was that antithetical to Marxian policy or Marxism?
So Stalin was described by Lenin before he died as a great Russian chauvinist. Okay, he believed that Russia and Russians and the Russian government had the moral, ethical, or political justification to centralize power in their own regime and to control the policies of their satellite nations and the other republics in the Soviet Union. And a lot of this is due to the legacy of Tsarism and the legacy of what Lenin called Great Russian Chauvinism, which is really a thing that still exists today, with the war in Ukraine right now, where the Russian government today still believes that they have a moral or cultural right to dominate that part of the world.
I don't disagree that there may have been like some difference in opinion between Lenin
It's an ideology.
and Stalin.
It's a great Russian chauvinist ideology. That's what Lenin called it.
Sure.
Basically.
Yeah. So Lenin, I'm sure there was disagreements between Lenin and Stalin. Why is what Stalin did in terms of expropriating agricultural products into the industrial heartland? Why was that antithetical to Marxism?
That's a good question. So when the Russian Revolution started, Lenin realized that we can't nationalize every industry. We can't make everything publicly owned immediately. It really has to be a gradual process with a workers' government overseeing this to either compensate the capitalists for their property in some way, or to raise small businesses up to the level where they can be nationalized in an equitable way. And this is if you look at history with the new economic plan and a lot of things that happened after the Civil War, Stalin actually protected the rights of capitalists to operate in the Soviet Union up until 1928, which is when the first 5-year plan started. And he did support the rights of individuals, including rich peasants, to employ people and to operate capitalism in Russia until they politically, provided a challenge to him. So historically, that if you have to look at the history of the new economic plan and the history of the Russian Revolution to really determine why all this happened. The Holodomor was really bad. I'm not going to.
No, sure. Can you please just like
because Lenin and Marx believe that nations have the right to self-determination. That nations are not supposed to be dominated by any.
They believed in Marx believed in nations. Marx believed in like the nation state.
And Lenin and they believed of the rights of oppressed nationalities to have political independence from either empires, from colonial powers. They supported independence of countries around the world. They used to be colonies or satellite states, or ones that used to be dominated by the larger powers. Okay. For example, they supported Ireland becoming independent from England historically. Like, that's an example I can think of.
Right. So you're saying Marx would not have even supported the existence of the Soviet Union then, right? Because the Soviet Union was like a bunch of other nations, essentially, that were sort of subsumed into the Supreme Soviet, the head of the Soviet state.
He would not have approved of how the Russian Communist Party centralized power into itself and carried out racist policies towards the satellite countries. Marx himself would not have approved of that. Lenin would not have approved of that himself, but Lenin died in, I think, 1925. And Lenin's last testament and will actually included his demand for Stalin to be removed from power.
Do you think
that's something that actually happened too?
Sure. So you think Marx was opposed? This is getting a little bit off topic, but you think Marx was like really opposed to racism?
Yes.
Okay. Have you read On the Jewish Question?
Definitely. I know On the Jewish Question. I have read that. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think about that?
Well, you see, on the Jewish question is actually a critique towards Bruno Bauer, who was a German philosopher at the time. Bruno Bauer and the German government supported policies that required Jews to convert to Protestantism before they could gain equal rights as Jewish citizens. Okay, now Karl Marx's father was a Jew who converted to Protestantism so he could be part of the German government. And this is what Marx was critiquing on the Jewish question. That's what they were talking about. And if you take a few quotes out of context from there, where he's paraphrasing Bruno Bauer's arguments and where he's paraphrasing the arguments of German philosophers at the time, if you take those out of context, it seems like pretty anti-Semitic that he published these words. But if you look at what he actually believed, which led to him being effectively canceled and exiled in Germany, he did politically advocate for equality for Jews, he was the descendant of Jews himself. So his father came from a long line of rabbinic Jews. So Marx was canceled. Marx was canceled in Germany for supporting equal rights for Jews.
When you say canceled, what do you mean?
He was blacklisted. He was essentially canceled. That's the best modern vernacular way for me to explain what happened. Like,
okay, because I've read like a few, I guess, analyses on the Jewish question. And
have you read the book itself or the work itself instead of the analyses of it?
No, I haven't. No, I haven't.
Why not?
But I've read some of the analyses of it, and you're saying that it's pretty clearly that he didn't mean it. But
no, you see, if you read the first part of it, it clearly outlines what he literally believed. The second part of On the Jewish Question is where he's going against Bruno Bauer and where he's going against the German government. But I would recommend you read the book itself, or not the book, the work itself, before you make up your mind conclusively.
Well, sure. I don't have time to read every book. Okay. What I'm saying is
it's not that long. It's a couple pages.
Hold on.
If you're not willing to read it itself, I don't understand why you bring it up.
Brother. So, but like when there's a whole bunch of scholars who are saying that like, well, it's not actually clear that he didn't mean this. Like, I mean, some of the statements in there are pretty like horrific and they're pretty straightforward and direct. And it certainly doesn't seem like he's like quoting somebody. It certainly seems that he's putting forward something. I mean, what would your response be to that?
He was paraphrasing Bruno Bauer's arguments in that work. Bruno Bauer and Marx were probably the young Hegelian philosophical wing of German academia at the time. Marx was a Jew himself, though, and his father was forced to convert to Protestantism. He wasn't forced to, but he was obligated to convert to Protestantism if he wanted to join the mainstream of German society, and that is part of what shaped Marx's views. Historically, that is true.
All right, I read differently, but I'll go back and just double check. I'll fact check myself to see.
Want to read the work itself?
Sure. No,
okay.
I'll do that.
Honestly.
So okay, Marx. You're saying he's not particularly a anti-Semite. He just conquered. Yeah. So
okay, I'll just finish. Yeah,
sure.
And I have one point to make after this.
Sure. So Marx is not particularly an anti-Semite, and he actually opposed all racism. He was sort of a social justice kind of hero. And so he would have not approved of Marxist countries throughout the 20th century then, right? Because they certainly didn't believe in his vision.
He would not have agreed with Stalinism, with the ideology that Stalin pioneered, which basically perverted Marxism and perverted communism to fit the interests of the Russian state bureaucracy.
So I'm not necessarily specifically referring to Stalinism.
Marx would not have gone along with it.
Sure. What about after Stalin? What about after Stalin? Like when there was still a totalitarian one-party state that like oppressed the rights of minorities. What about that?
Well, yeah, there was still the legacy of Stalin and the legacy of oppression that happened at the time, and there was a Cold War happening. So I mean, it's kind of, I don't know. Marx was dead by the time the Russian Revolution even happened. So it's technically impossible to say what he would have thought one way or the other, but I know as a fact that Lenin's dying wish was to remove Stalin from power in Russia. Like Lenin himself, that was his last dying wish, which unfortunately didn't happen.
So
And one point I'd like to bring up. As well, in terms of Marx's view about race. Marx supported Lincoln and he supported the United States during the Civil War. He said that communists and progressives around the world should rally behind the Union and Abraham Lincoln in order to end slavery. That's one concrete example of Marx's views about race.
Okay. So
from when he was alive.
Sure. My question is then, so the current topic is, was Marxism overall like a good thing in the 20th century? And, you started off by talking about
the 20th century.
Well, this is what the first part of this discussion is about, the 20th century.
Okay. Well.
Yeah. So, and then you start, and you on topic, you talk about the Soviet Union and you defend parts of the Soviet Union to begin with. And so, what I'm sort of noticing here is, I'm putting forward criticisms of the Soviet Union, right? All the empirical metrics, it was economically worse. It was economically stagnant. On civil rights, it was worse. It was a totalitarian dictatorship. Like, whether it be in Stalin's era, whether it not be in Stalin's era, like, it was just like, there's all sorts of negatives when you compare it to other places in the world. And I guess my question is, are you saying that we can't use, like, Marxist countries as examples of, because it's not perfectly aligned with Marxian theory? But how do we know if it's not perfectly aligned with Marxian theory? Because he's been dead now in the 20th century.
Yeah,
right?
just very quick, as we're getting into like the second chunk of this first part of the debate, I do want to have most of this last portion to be less about Marx, although he's obviously relevant, and more so about the particular realities of 20th century socialism, if we could.
Thank you. Right. And so, I can just run off some facts because I did, some research on this. Overall GDP growth, pollution generated per unit of GDP, disposable income, efficiency of GDP production, and economic sustainability, right? The communist countries, including the Soviet Union that you talked about, right, were consistently worse off and were far more economically stagnant than market-oriented countries. And so if you look at the economic metrics and you just see overall worse outcomes, and you look at the civil liberties aspect and you see overall worse outcomes, how was the empirical reality of Marxist countries in the 20th century actually a good thing?
If you're asking me about the empirical reality of it,
yes,
then that's something. So, if you want to talk about the efficacy of a state-owned planned economy, you want to look at modern day China, which has an annual growth rate of, I believe, about 6% per year, as compared to the United States, has a growth rate of about 1.8 to 2% a year. Having a publicly operated planned economy that doesn't operate for the benefit of a small group of shareholders or capitalists, the goal of it isn't necessarily to make people richer, but to make investments towards a longer term, fair or more equal society.
When did China begin to experience like the explosive economic growth that you're talking about?
When the planned economy in China was put in place during the Chinese Revolution. I'm not sure,
So this is actually not true, right? So this would have been in the very early 2000s when they switched to a market-oriented economy. And that's when you see the vast majority of the explosive growth in the Chinese economy. And in fact, currently, I'm glad you brought this up, according to the IMF, the China state-owned industries are 20% less productive than their privately operated firms within China. So not only did most of the explosive growth of China's economy come once they liberalized and moved away from a planned economy, but even within this market economy, the privately operated firms perform 20% better than the state-operated enterprises. What do you think about that?
Well, the state-operated enterprises are, let's think, what is nationalized in China? Probably energy production, probably finances. In terms of the productivity of healthcare, is another thing that's nationalized in China. I don't know. I've heard there is an argument to be made that public healthcare systems, even in Canada or UK, are less productive or efficient than. Wait, one second.
I'm going to get a cheesesteak.
That
Wanna get a
cheesesteak is
that's
made.
right.
It's made possible by capitalism. I just want to make that absolutely clear.
That's right. That's a good time for a word from our sponsor. This debate is brought to you by Penn Station, home of some of the most popular and fastest growing cheesesteak retail locations in all of
Sorry.
the West. All right, back to our scheduled programming.
Yeah, I mean, there are arguments to be made that the Canadian healthcare system and the British healthcare system, you have to wait in line longer for transplants. It's, I've heard arguments like that made where it's not as efficient or productive as the United States healthcare system. But the fact is that everybody in these countries everybody in those countries has the right to healthcare. There's nobody without insurance in these countries.
Okay, you brought up China. Let's stick with China for a second. You talked about the growth of China.
No, it's a similar principle though, because I mean, I don't know.
Well, no. So it's not, right? Because in China, like, you see the explosive growth of the economy once they liberalize their trade policy, right? In the early 2000s, I'm pretty sure 2001 was when this happened.
Yeah, in terms of liberalizing it, making it a more mixed economy but still, over the majority of the Chinese economy is still publicly owned.
Well, hold on. So moving away from a planned kind of Marxian economy, it caused explosive economic growth.
The major industries are still planned, but there are free market zones which operate in China.
Okay, so when you're saying it's planned, do you understand the difference between like a state-owned enterprise and a planned economy?
A state-owned enterprise would be a facet of a planned economy. In a Marxist country, I would say.
Okay.
It'd be a facet. It'd be an element of it. They would want to create more state-owned enterprises of major industries such as energy, healthcare, education,
right.
things that people need access to secure their opportunities and their survival, basically.
Right. So the difference here is that in a planned economy, you have the government which is dictating which specific things are going to be produced to what level to meet certain particular needs. Right. In China, right, I'm not denying that they have a whole host of civil rights issues and a whole host of other issues, but state-owned enterprises there operate, like, although they're owned by the government to the most extent, they operate within a market economy, right? Since 2001, since China liberalized
market economy,
since China liberalized its trade policy, and even within China, right, those state-owned enterprises are about 20%, according to the IMF, about 20% less productive than entirely privately owned enterprises. So my question for you is, so we see two things going on here, right? So you're saying that it's a good thing that we have this kind of Marxist. Hold real quick. You think it's a good thing that we have this Marxist planned economy, but like, isn't it odd then, if you're saying this is a good thing, that when China moves away from the sort of Marxist planned economy, they start doing really good, and then even within that little extra doing good they're doing, like the privately owned enterprises are doing even better than the state-owned enterprises.
So you're saying that. So you're saying that the industries in the free market zones, such as like the Apple iPhone factories, for example, which operate in China, are more productive than the state-owned, nationalized industries.
I don't specifically know if Apple factories are going to be.
That's an example, right?
Well, the thing is, I don't know if the example holds true to the average. I'm just talking about the average.
I don't know, but in terms of comparing the productivity of different industries based on if they're nationalized or not, I don't know. It's hard to tell if that's a result of the nationalization or just the general inefficiency of the Chinese government itself and the bureaucratic nature of it.
Right. So isn't there like a problem with an economic system that leaves the well-being of the economy up to a government that may be inefficient? Like a Marxist kind of planned economy? Isn't that kind of like a pretty like glaring issue that, like, why would you leave the economy up to like you said, inefficient and bureaucratic?
Still, even historically in Russia and China before they were communist, the general productivity of these countries was much lower than in Western European or country nations or the United States itself. So a lot of this problems with efficiency and productivity is kind of I'm not sure if it's necessarily due to communism itself or if it's due to just the bureaucratic nature of their government.
So the problem with this, though, is that the trend that we see actually is that underdeveloped third world countries in a capitalist global economy tend to grow much faster than developed economies, with the exception of Marxist planned economies, right? So I'm talking about growth here. Like, why wouldn't you
and
see?
If you look at the economic growth of the Soviet Union in the 1930s, it outpaced Western Europe and the United States like by a quite a bit. It wasn't really affected by the Great Depression at the time.
Yes,
which led it to be more productive than the rest of the world. If you
look at one very specific time period, there are certain metrics that the Soviet Union did better in. In the same way, if you look at the 20s, there's different metrics that they did worse in. But I'm talking about overall. Like, I can show you.
Even if you look at this a general context of Chinese history and Chinese society itself.
Real quick. What I'm saying is, when you look at overall, like these graphs. Like, these graphs show,
I think the majority of Chinese people, had access to public education.
Sure. Okay.
Basically, within the past 50 years or so.
I don't.
In general, right?
Okay. Yeah.
As a result. Okay. Of the Chinese Revolution.
My question is,
and that includes women and.
For the communist countries, so you look at these graphs, right? Why is it that, like, the communist countries, like, underperform compared to the market economies?
Underperform. Is that due to communism, or is it due to the unique conditions in these nations? Is what I'm wondering.
It seems like oddly,
because if the Chinese Revolution never happened, and if China never modernized or attempted to modernize, really, then it would be worse than it is today for most people.
So when China, okay, let's talk about China then again. We see the vast explosion of economic growth coming after they liberalized the economy. But before they did this, do you think
it was growing before they liberalized the economy too?
So you think the great leap forward, right, with all those people dead and killing the sparrows and expropriating food and moving it to the wrong places? Do you think that was like a good thing, or do you think it's a bad thing overall?
A good thing. People dying is bad.
Okay, I like that. We're getting somewhere.
People starving and dying is bad in general. But if there was a Marxist revolution in the United States, do you think we would have a great leap forward or a 5-year plan like happened in Stalinist Russia or Marxist China? I kind of doubt it. Because they were compelled to modernize at an accelerated, exponential rate to basically catch up with Western Europe and with the United States, which led them to enact these policies. They were compelled to do that based on the historical context, which led them to make these policies.
Then why did they only catch up with the U.S. once they liberalized their market and moved towards like a more market-based economy, away from a Marxist-themed planned economy?
They still have a Marxist-themed planned economy. They just have free economic zones in China where foreign companies are able to invest and employ people. It's still essentially a state-ran economy, though. Overall, the Communist Party of China has the final say on almost all economic business in China. And they have a monopoly on deciding contracts of foreign trade.
Yeah,
so I don't deny it is essentially a planned economy. Well, no, I would say essentially a planned with elements of capitalism.
That essentially is pulling that essentially there is doing a lot.
It's a mixed economy.
It's doing a lot of heavy lifting, right?
It's a mixed economy.
To some extent, and the fact that all developed countries right now are mixed economies, right?
It's a mixed economy with the majority of it on the planned side, the minority of it in the private sector, as opposed to a country like Sweden or Denmark, where it is a mix. They have some things that are national, or a country like even like Mexico. They have a nationalized oil industry, which has basically allowed them to benefit from their natural resources, which used to be owned by corporations in the United States. And that happened after the Mexican Revolution, which wasn't a communist revolution. But I would mixed economies exist all around the world. China is just one with the majority of it on the plan side.
Do you think it's a coincidence that once China moves towards more of a mixed economy, that they have an economic boom and are able to achieve the explosive economic growth you're talking about?
Well, I mean, their boom happened at the same time as roughly, I mean, as our Great Recession.
No.
I mean, it kind of coincided at the same time. They had an 8% growth rate before the Great Recession started, and I believe went down to 6 or 5 or high fives after that.
That's not necessarily true, but even if that is the case, what point does that make?
I don't know, I mean, in terms of China liberalizing their economy, that means allowing foreign investors such as Apple to start up businesses in China and employ Chinese workers while paying taxes to Chinese government, which essentially negotiates the wages and the benefits, etc., of their citizens. That's essentially what liberalizing the Chinese economy meant.
Right. So, like, moving away from a more like Marxist planned economy and allowing companies to operate.
It's not necessarily moving away from it. It's just a different path of development than what happened in the Soviet Union.
Right, but it necessarily means moving away from it if they're moving towards like more like of a market style economy with more private ownership, right? I mean, it must by definition be moving away from the kind of Marxist planned economy that you're talking about.
Private ownership that exists wouldn't have been there if they didn't allow foreign countries to make these investments into China. Fundamentally, that's what the bottom line is.
Yeah, I'm confused. So
that benefits China because they receive their government receives tax revenue, and their workers receive jobs, basically like pretty well-paying jobs in the context of China.
Right. So companies like allowing a market economy with companies and like global trade and all this stuff, global capitalism.
Allowing market zones, allowing free market zones in China.
Yeah, you're right. So you would say that this was good for China, and this is what allowed for their explosive GDP growth.
So if a Marxist country attempted to completely nationalize all property like Stalin did, on a whim as like a knee-jerk reaction to the economic problems that existed, like say famine and starvation, which did exist in Russia at the time and periodically historically existed. It really, like, in the context of China, it would be cut off from the world trade system and it would implode. Because it's basically an island of communism existing in an ocean of capitalism, and they still need access to the world markets if they want to stay competitive.
So I'm gonna read some stats to you real quick. So in 1978, 78.3% of the urban labor force in China was employed by the public sector. In 1995, that dropped to 56.4%, and then in 2003, that was down to 32.8%, and then in 2013, the public sector employment rate was about 21.3%. So you see an overall like pretty massive decline of people employed in the public sector and a lot more people employed in the private sector when you see the explosive growth of China's economy. Do you think that's a coincidence?
That's the percentage of people employed.
So involved in like the economy.
So that's also in context of their population growth and the population growth in areas where they allowed these free market zones to exist.
Are you saying the free market zones cover 80% of the workers?
The free market, 80% of the workers are employed in industries that wouldn't exist without foreign investments.
That wasn't my question.
Capitalist countries.
Right, that wasn't my question. My question was, so if we have 21.3% of it being public sector employment right now, right?
And the Chinese government, their line is if these corporations don't play ball.
Are most workers in China under like these free market zones? And if so, if this is the case, if most of them are employed by the private sector, like how does that make them a mostly planned economy?
So, okay, which industries, I'm going to look this up, which industries are nationalized in China?
I'm
The
sure you can find
five.
specific industries, but I'm talking
Okay, so
overall,
power
like percentage of the workers.
generation, state-owned enterprises, because if these industries become more productive, if they become more developed, they're going to need less workers. If they have access to better technology to run, say, a power plant, right? Or like if you think about it that way, most Chinese universities are publicly owned. How many employees could they possibly need in these industries? And would it be economically, and would it be the smart move to pay people money that for jobs that the government doesn't really need? Or would it be smart to have these people employed in productive industries that provides direct revenue to China? How many people could you employ to like in Russia, like they had almost no unemployment, but what they did is they employed their people's jobs were to like sweep the sidewalks, and they were paid as much as a factory worker for doing that. Is that the economically smart thing to do? Or if you were China, would you want to invite foreign investors to, say, build factories and employing people in productive industries?
100%. Yeah, I think people should be employed in productive industries.
And the bottom line with the Chinese Communist Party,
oh my
right, go ahead.
God, yeah, you would agree that
Go
like
ahead.
hiring people to go sweep the sidewalk for a whole shit ton of money. I mean, that'd probably be like a pretty stupid idea from just like a productivity perspective, right?
Well, yeah, but in the context of Soviet Russia, like they were essentially cut off from the world market, but they still had an obligation to feed their citizens. So it was basically a contradiction in their system.
Okay, sure. What I'm trying to ask is like, okay, so when you're saying that it's a bad idea for somebody to go like sweep a sidewalk, even if they spend 5 hours doing it and it's hard work, you would agree that that still like what the work they're doing, it doesn't have a lot of value, right?
Right. Yeah.
Right. So the value of their work there is not being determined by how much labor they're putting into it. It's being determined by what?
Wait, sorry, can you rephrase the question one more time?
Yeah, the value of that labor, right, is not calculated by how many hours they spent sweeping the sidewalk, how hard they're working doing that. The value of that labor is determined by what? What is that value determined by?
Yeah, like that job exists because it's the Soviet government said everybody has the right to be employed, which means they have the right to have solidly means they have a right to a revenue stream so they can survive, which is why that happened, which is why they employed people to sweep the sidewalks.
Okay, so you're just pointing to yet another inefficiency of like Marxian thinking.
It's an inefficiency, but you have to look at the context of what was actually happening, though. Most people in Russia were like illiterate up until the point the revolution happened. Like the vast majority of people had no access to public education. The vast majority of people were effectively illiterate, and the Russian government went out of their way to keep them in that place until the revolution happened. So I don't really blame them.
This half of the topic,
yeah.
And then we're going to move to the second half, just so you know. But
yes. So in terms of why would the average Russian support communism, they would have viewed it as a way to increase their personal opportunities, which directly meant the right to an education. Of the average Russian woman, the average Russian Jew or minority, they viewed it as a pathway to increase their own opportunities.
Do we get like a short closing for this section, Duke?
Yeah, we can do that.
And same with Russia. Same with China.
Like 5 minutes, so if you guys can handle it maturely, that would be incredible.
Sure.
Just wrap up this point, and then Stink will be the moderator for a moment, and then you guys can make a closing statement as well. And I'll be back.
How much longer do we have for this debate? Like, how much more do we have?
Another 45 minutes on the other side as well.
Okay.
Cool. I mean, we're already pushing past time a little bit, Duke, just so you know.
That's what I was wondering, too, exactly, yeah.
All right.
We can like move over to the other half like right now, basically, too, as well.
Sure.
But, I'll be back in 5.
My closing on this is very, very short. So, I mean, we went through a lot of stuff there. A lot of it was irrelevant to the actual question. Some of it was relevant to the question. On all the empirical metrics in terms of like the actual economic metrics, Marxism in the 20th century was an absolute failure in terms of actual GDP measurements, in terms of pollution per GDP measurements, in terms of economic sustainability, preventing stagnation, all of these things. Marxism was an absolute failure in every example that you can point to in the world during the 20th century. They're not even exceptions, because the countries that did experience a whole bunch of economic growth, such as China, tended to do so after they began to liberalize their economy and began to move away from a planned economy and allow more of a market economy. And then in terms of like civil liberties, I don't care that the Soviet Union, quote unquote, gave women the right to vote first, because there was nothing to vote for. And this is a recurrent theme in Marxist countries. They tend to be highly authoritarian. They rank almost always consistently near the bottom in every single metric of personal and political freedom. I haven't heard any argument presented that actually empirically demonstrated that during the 20th century, Marxist countries were actually overall better, or that Marxism was overall better for the world in the 20th century.
Okay, I would rebuke that by saying, communism in general, this is like a very hubristic take, because I believe that if you're not willing to really examine Marxism and communist history in an objective way, you're kind of missing the boat when China is, like, a lot of people say that China is basically on its way to overtaking the United States as the world's preeminent superpower, or the world's dominant economic power. So in that respect, I would say you can't claim it was a failure if that's what ends up happening. And in terms of the inefficiency of a planned economy versus the efficiency of a privately owned economy, a good example is the United States healthcare system, where we pay twice as much for essentially the same services as people around the world who have public healthcare systems. Our education system, our debt for educational costs and educational loans is also like eclipsing nearly any other country. We have the world's biggest prison population due to the inequalities that exist in the United States, and the abject poverty that a lot of people live through. Nearly 20 to 30 million Americans still don't have healthcare in the United States. So I view these kind of processes as indicative of an outdated philosophy or economic system in America. And also the Soviet Union and Russia went from being the Russian Empire, which was a semi-medieval, I don't want to say backwards because that sounds racist, but women and minorities had basically no rights, to essentially the world's second most powerful country within the course of a few decades. So even on that, and like I said earlier, they ended up allying with us and fighting against the Nazis, making it so freedom could exist in the world. So in terms of that being a net, I would say that is a net positive of the Soviet Union's history. So I think it's more nuanced than a lot of people want to. I kind of reject empiricism as a philosophy that validates these things itself, because there's always a human and ideological and religious element which you have to take into account when it comes to history and when it comes to politics. I believe that you have to look at the material conditions which existed and how these ideologies were shaped in order to tackle the material conditions at the time. So, yeah.
Okay. Actually, did you already give your closing on the first part?
I did.
Perfect. Okay. All right. So then let's move into the part 2 here. So now we're going to look to the future. So we're not going to try to talk about any of the successes or failures of the 20th century. And we're just going to look forward into our crystal ball here. So now we're going to be debating whether or not Marxist socialist policies would help the world today. So we'll do like mini opening statements here. So let's reverse the order from last time. Let's have Lactoid start off. Just kind of a mini opener for why you think Marxist socialist policies would not help the world today.
Yeah, so I'm going to piggyback a little bit off of the prior thing we talked about, because I think all of the empirics there do matter. And I think the empirics of history and studying history is important when it comes to determining what we should be doing going forward. And all the evidence seems to demonstrate that Marxism is very not good when it comes to organizing a society. And we know this because of how it worked in the past. And that should make us at least highly skeptical of it going forward. I also want to point out that although personally, as some of you know, I do oppose a welfare state, no serious economist would assert that any government with any welfare state is Marxian socialism. So I'm not going to be necessarily defending some sort of anarcho-capitalist republic here. I'm simply going to be defending, like, going forward, should we be moving towards a sort of Marxian planned economy framework, or should we continue to maintain a market system, potentially with some level of a welfare state? I think those are completely different things, and I don't think I think they are incompatible. And so I don't want this to turn into, we can talk about healthcare, but I don't think that just because a country has healthcare paid for by the public, that necessarily makes the country a Marxian socialist country. The idea of just nationalizing industries going forward, I think, is intrinsically morally wrong because A, it's stealing, but B, if there are insufficient statistics to show that it would actually provide a benefit to nationalize any particular segment of the economy, then I don't know why we would do it. If we have evidence to suggest that maybe certain industries actually function better when they're left in the private market hands, such as construction companies, there's some arguments as to voucher programs, then if the evidence is there doesn't actually seem to be an empirical basis to move towards a Marxian planned economy basis for any of these things. And then on top of all of that, currently speaking, economic freedom is strongly correlated with civic freedoms. And even the communist countries today, like Cuba or Vietnam, China to some extent, I think that those are elements in which countries that at least have a history or currently have some kind of planned economy system, they tend to fail at those metrics. So overall, I don't see what the benefit would be on moving forward with any kind of Marxian socialism here. And you'd have to show it to me on very specific elements why we should nationalize things. And even if you can show specific things should be nationalized, that doesn't show that the entire economy should be nationalized.
Okay, so I do not believe that practically, at least in the United States, which is where I live, I do not believe that practically, if a Marxist party was in control of the government, it would be in their interest or in the interest of anybody else to immediately nationalize every industry. I don't think that many actual Marxists or many actual socialists advocate for this in general. I believe that if a Marxist party were to be voted in democratically in the United States, they might consider nationalizing some industries that have a larger amount of importance or a larger amount of employees, especially industries specifically such as healthcare, education, and major parts of and the financial industry too. Would benefit the vast majority of people if they were publicly owned and not run for profits. These are industries that people really that affect people's daily lives and affects their ability to survive. And as for the claim that nationalization is theft, that is a take I also disagree with because, say with a historical example with Iran and Mossadegh, who was elected as president of Iran or prime minister of Iran in the 1950s. He wanted to nationalize Iran's oil industry, which was owned by British capitalists primarily, in order to allow the profits to benefit the majority of the people in Iran, to alleviate the poverty and cultural and the semi-medieval situation which existed there at the time. So in that case, I would say it was probably theft for the Anglo-Iranian oil company to claim that oil in the first place and run it the way they did, exploiting their workers and exploiting the people there to a point where they really had no choice but to support a socialist to deal with it. Another example is Mexico with Pemex, where Mexico had, I believe, the second largest oil reserves in the world up until World War II. And the Mexican Revolution happened, which led the Mexican government to forming Pemex. And the revenues and profits from Pemex, which are Pemex, which is a publicly owned company, has gone to fund education and to improve people's lives in Mexico to a considerable extent, to fund the Mexican government, essentially, to provide services to its people. So in that case, I would say that it is not theft, but a practical decision meant for a utilitarian benefit for most people, as opposed to letting the profits go into the pockets of a few shareholders. In terms of utilitarian benefit, I would say nationalization. That is the primary goal of nationalization. A public utilitarian benefit of a resource. I would classify more as that than theft by a government. So the government, so the political parties or the rulers of said government can personally benefit from it. I would say that would be theft. However, in the case of a Marxist country or a socialist country nationalizing economic resources, like when Cuba nationalized their a lot of the farms they had, which were owned by American companies, I would say a vast majority of Cubans have benefited from that, and that makes it justified. The vast majority of Cubans have access to healthcare and education, which did not exist before they nationalized property that was especially owned by United Fruit, before they nationalized the casinos that were owned by the American mafia, essentially. So it really depends on the context, but I would never classify nationalization itself as theft. It's a government policy meant to utilize the resources of said nation to benefit the public. That is what nationalization is, as opposed to benefiting capitalists.
Hey, real quick,
yeah, right. Go ahead.
Yeah. If the government nationalizes a building, let's just say, like they've got the building owned by one person, the government just says, okay, it's owned by us now. They nationalized it, right? Would you consider that to be theft?
It depends on the context. I'm not like.
What context would make it not theft?
If a single person owned 1,000 apartment complexes or 1,000 houses and essentially monopolized housing in a city or a state or a neighborhood to the point where they fixed the price of said housing, so they themselves could profit off of basically people's homelessness, I would say the government is obligated to step in as a facet of the social contract.
Hold on. Wait, somebody comes in and quite literally takes the property owned by somebody else. How is that not like morally theft?
Morally theft or legally theft?
Morally, because legally you could just pass a law saying it's not theft.
I'm not really concerned with the morality of such thing. I'm not.
Okay.
Yeah. In terms of the morality of this, I say the immoral thing is to profit off of people's homelessness and to profit off of people's poverty. That's the real immoral stance to take.
So you're not,
in my opinion,
sure, you're not. You're only concerned with the legal element of this. You're not really concerned about the moral element.
I'm concerned with the utilitarian, philosophical, and legal element.
Okay. The utilitarian, right? So it's kind of like
philosophically, that's how I frame it. Yeah.
As long as what you're taking is in the benefit of some other person or a larger group of people, then
A larger
you would
group
say,
of people.
then you would say it's not
Yeah.
theft. Yeah. So let me ask you. Let's say I robbed your house and then like distributed 80% of what I robbed to like poor kids. You would consider that to not be theft.
That would be theft. But nationalization is not robbing
Wait,
anybody, of anything.
why would that? Hold on. From a utilitarian perspective.
Nationalization is a legal process in which many companies are actually compensated for the property they used to own.
Redbeard. I'm not talking.
So this is a false comparison.
Redbeard. I'm not talking about like the legal element here. What I'm asking is, if I were to go in your house and collect your property, and then I went to a poor neighborhood and distributed your property out to all the poor kids, and overall this led to an overall increase in the well-being of these poor kids, to a sufficiently high utilitarian perspective or utilitarian degree from your perspective, would you consider that to be theft?
Like if I hoarded all of the food for a small town in my garage and you came in, stole it, and distributed it among the poor and among the homeless, it's technically theft.
Okay, what I went to your
that's
fridge?
That's not a real life kind of. That's not really a relevant argument, though. I don't think.
No. So it is though, right? Because if I went into your fridge and took your food and distributed it out to a bunch of starving kids, or I went into
I'm talking if I hoarded all of the food for a small town, right? Like say I and a gang took over Safeway, right? The only Safeway or the only grocery store in a small town. And the government came along and said you are not allowed to fix the price of food.
So
is that theft?
So, first of all, if they came and took the property and handed it out, it would be theft. But my question for you is: are you every example that you give, you're saying it's not theft when it's your house, or sorry, you're saying it is theft when it's your house, but it's not theft in the example of a monopoly. So my question:
so nationalization is done with really productive property.
I'm almost done there. I'm almost done here. Right. So, is it your stance that in order for nationalization to not be theft, there needs to be some kind of monopoly in that area? Is that your position?
Not necessarily a monopoly, but if a Marxist government had a nationalization policy they were putting in place, it would be concerned with productive property primarily, or productive industries, as opposed to food, right? To a person's food. No, let me finish. I didn't interrupt you.
Yes, you did.
Okay, maybe I did. Okay, touche. But as opposed to a person's possessions. Okay, there's a difference between productive property and personal possessions. Okay, a power plant is a piece of productive property. Hey, your car is a personal possession, right?
So the example that you brought up was food.
If you purchase houses for the property for the purpose of flipping it and leasing it out or selling it to somebody else, it becomes productive property at that point.
What if I buy
it produces surplus value for you.
What if I buy a computer to stream and make money off of it?
That's a possession.
Why is that a possession? I'm making money off of it.
That's like a small capitalist kind of productive piece of property, I would say. Yeah, that's kind of
it's a capitalist piece of productive property. Isn't that the definition of private property? Isn't that the definition of private property?
Private property is it's a wider umbrella rather than just things that you use or own in your daily life.
It's stuff that you make money off of, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you have a computer that you're using to stream and make money off of, this would become private property, right? That you're using to make money.
There's a certain amount of private property which is acceptable, I would say, in an actual Marxist country. It's the point of it isn't to make publicly owned every possession, every piece of private property immediately in case a revolution happens. I would say that.
Okay, at what point does like the private property that somebody's using to make money, at what point does that become unacceptable?
Concretely, I would say when there's a threshold of the numbers of employees involved in said industry. Concretely, that's the number one indicator. The number of employees that work for that business.
So you would only be
I'd
in
say that's the
favor.
primary indicator of it.
Sure. So you would only be in favor of nationalizing companies maybe that were over a certain level of employees, and then you wouldn't nationalize the other ones.
And even in the Russian Revolution, that's what happened.
Sure. So like, how many employees before you get nationalized, and why does? Well, hold on. Here's a better question. How many employees?
It depends. I don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Honestly.
This is an important question because this
it depends what the industry is too.
Right. This is going to be a philosophical. This is going to be a philosophical question. Right. How many employees do you have to have before, when the government nationalizes your property, it's no longer theft?
So there's an element of the number of people employed in said industry. There's also an element of the how vital said industry is to the functioning of the country. So I'd say those two factors, like for example, a gold mine, right? A resource that is highly sought after and necessary for an economy and for society to function. So I mean, honestly, like a lot of anarchists and Marxists say that if the owners form a co-op to own this gold mine, that is socialism. I would disagree. I would say that even if the owners at that gold mine claimed it to be their own, and so they themselves could personally profit off of it after selling gold to the outside world, that would itself still be a form of capitalism. Because the purpose of it is to generate profit for the owners of that industry.
Right, just like people who use a computer to stream, right? The reason I'm asking this is because, for me, theft is like morally, like a very straightforward concept,
Do you consider taxation to be theft?
Of course, right. It's a very straightforward concept. Yes, of course.
Do you consider taxation to be theft?
Yes, I've said yes.
Taxation?
For the third time now, yes. When you take the property from somebody else without their consent, this is theft. It's a different argument about whether or not you were like, well, fuck it, we're just going to steal it because I think it's good, right? I think it's better to steal it. But you seem to be denying that nationalization of industries is theft in the first place.
I believe it's intrinsically theft. I think that the process a capitalist, the process a corporation can use to acquire that property in most of the world, especially through government corruption and these sort of processes, that itself would be more theft, I would say, than nationalizing an industry so the vast majority of people in a country could benefit off of it being publicly owned.
Okay, but let's say
that would be more.
Let's say you had an industry.
Let's
say you had an industry let's say it was like a financial firm that it's not the same thing, right? The government didn't a corrupt government didn't help them gain a foothold anywhere. Like they just were a couple people. They're smart at money. They formed their own business, and then they grew, and now they're like a pretty big firm. You said you wanted to nationalize the financial industry. Would you want to go and take their building and take their business?
Well, generally with most of the financial industry, I would say yeah. If I was voted in as president tomorrow and I ran on a Marxist platform, I would feel compelled to nationalize major parts of the financial industry, specifically to prevent a situation like the recession that happened when I was a kid from repeating itself. So actual safeguards can be put in place to protect regular people from predatory lending practices and from business models of these companies which depend on the fact that they can profit off of people's financial illiteracy.
Couldn't you have regulations against... real quick, couldn't you have regulations against those things without nationalizing those industries?
I suppose so, but even in that case, you're acknowledging that there's a flaw in this capitalistic, in the way this industry is run, and you're admitting that capitalism has contradictions and flaws, which government is necessary to intervene in. Even at that point, you're already acknowledging that.
So I'm not necessarily acknowledging that. What I'm asking you is that
you're saying that there needs to be regulations for these industries to run, and if those regulations don't work,
I'm not saying that. That's not what I'm saying.
What are you going to do?
That's not what I'm saying. Right? Here's what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that you brought up two examples of things that you are concerned about. You are concerned about predatory lending and business models which depend on profiting off of people's financial literacy, right? That's what you're concerned about. My question
Definitely.
for you is, why would you need to nationalize these, like the financial industry, to prevent this? Why couldn't you just put in regulations like most capitalist countries do? Why couldn't you just put some regulations to prevent predatory lending or business models which depend on people's financial literacy?
Well, if you look at what happened with, say, the Dodd-Frank Act, it seems like the influence that the financial industry has over the government supersedes the government's obligation as part of the social contract with our citizens.
Okay, so you're concerned
And
that
that
the
is why
government
the regulatory model is not
Mhm.
a sustainable long-term solution
All
to
right.
this issue.
So you're concerned that the government is corrupt and getting too much money, or has some kind of interest in these
Yeah.
businesses. So you're saying the government should
Right.
come and just take it directly and have it.
Well, the government will never do that. With our current government, they will never do that. So even if I posited this plan with them, like the Dodd-Frank Act tried to do with regulating these industries in an equitable, fair way, it still wouldn't happen.
Right. What I'm saying
Because
is
capitalism is more than economics. It's also it's essentially also a kind of a form of government too.
no.
And your claim that taxation is theft is interesting too, because would you claim that, like, how would you drive anywhere if there were not roads that were built by the government using taxation? How would you protect your property as a capitalist unless there were police that were paid by the government and which had a monopoly on the use of force in our country to defend your own property? Or firefighters in case an accident happens and a fire happens.
Can I answer? So none of that, like, I could be in favor of all that, and none of that means that I have to concede that taxation is not theft, right? So just because you may need to steal to accomplish some end doesn't mean that you didn't steal. Doesn't mean that in a vacuum that theft is not wrong,
It's
or
voluntary,
or that even not in a vacuum that theft is like a wrong that needs to contend with the good that you're trying to do. That's a specific analysis that we can get into, right? But yeah, if you're going to steal money and go build a road, or you're going to steal money and go build whatever, that I would consider that to be theft. But you're advocating for a lot more than that, right? You're advocating for theft to fix problems that I suggested you could probably fix, like, without needing so much theft, right? So, for example, specifically with the financial industry, the financial industry, for predatory lending and business models that depend on people's financial literacy, okay? If there's enough political capital to nationalize these industries, why wouldn't there be enough political capital to simply put in firm regulations on these industries saying they can't do these things that you're concerned about, but you're also not going to go take the business or take the building from the group of people that built it honestly?
It's impossible because those regulations are interfering with the right as capitalists to profit as private individuals off of a free market system.
Yes, we have regulations. You think
so that is
America
a contradiction right there?
You think America has no regulation? You would agree America is a capitalist country that has a lot of regulations.
America,
right?
Yeah, especially in the since the New Deal, where they had a lot more regulations over the financial industry, which have been rolled back in the past 40 years.
Yes, there's been political will to move away from those specific regulations.
If it was possible to regulate these, I would expect that they would have never deregulated them. If it was possible for these industries to be profitable without regulating them, right?
How can you hold on? How can you say this when we have? I hate to go back to the fucking history thing, but when we have plenty of examples of privatization, when you have lots of examples of, like, public enterprises or public assets being privatized. Aren't you concerned that if you, like, nationalize these industries in the future, couldn't they just become privatized?
Wait, come again?
If you nationalize the financial sector, couldn't it just become privatized in the future?
No, because the nationalization of the financial sector would only happen as a result of, practically, it really would only happen as a result of a political revolution in America to actually institute a direct democratic system. So that is the crux of Marxism. That's where the crossroads are at the point of revolutionary Marxism. That's the only practical way this would happen. Essentially,
the only practical way this would happen would be a revolution.
The only real way that would happen is if there was a revolution. Yeah,
and you advocate for this system. So are you advocating for a revolution?
A nonviolent, peaceful political revolution. Yeah, I'd say so. To extend democracy into the economy and to every facet of our society. Yes.
Okay. How would a peaceful revolution work here?
Well, if there are examples of the peaceful revolutions, and like the Glorious Revolution in England, for example, was a peaceful transition of power, where the Catholic absolute monarchy was expelled by Parliament, and they invited, that's one example, and they basically created modern England through the Glorious Revolution with the rights of Parliament and the rights of private individuals to operate capitalism.
Can you name me a peaceful communist revolution?
No.
Okay.
They have all been followed by a reaction from the capitalist class to assert their authority over their property and over the people in these nations. Yes.
Gotcha.
So no, there has not been a peaceful Marxist revolution.
And so wouldn't you see that backlash in America too?
Possibly, but I don't think it would be as brutal necessarily if that happened. I don't know. It's very speculative at this point, honestly, because we're so far from even the norms in a social democratic country, in terms of how we view the rights of the individual to exist and survive, than we are from an actual Marxist communist system. So it's real. I don't think the vast majority of Americans would be down for a Marxist revolution in my lifetime. However, if it did happen, it would be qualitatively different from Russia or China, where, like I said, the vast majority of people were illiterate peasants who daily struggle to feed their families, as opposed to the United States, where we have a much higher educational and cultural kind of development as a result of our historical progress in America.
When you mentioned nationalizing,
look at the Civil War. The Civil War was bloody, and some people consider that to have been revolutionary. And they got rid of slavery, right? What was that justified? Do you think, fighting the Civil War to liberate human property?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So did the Union government do theft on the slave owners?
Well, no. So
by defying their right to private property?
Well, no. So, I don't believe that human beings are valid property, as a concept.
They did.
I'm sure they did. I would disagree with them, right? Now, the Union did have to steal money to fund
regulate slavery out of existence.
The Union
right?
did. Well, they were trying to, and then the South.
The material conditions made that impossible.
Well, no. They were trying, and then the South revolted. Yeah. And it led to the
bloodiest war. So they weren't really trying to get to outlaw slavery. They were trying to make so slavery couldn't expand into other parts of North America. But it's unfair to say that even they were really trying to make slavery illegal in the United States up until the Civil War. It's not the case. They're trying to make it so new states couldn't become right.
History rabbit hole here and try to keep thinking about policy.
That's fair. I was trying to get to that. So you talked about nationalizing education. What do you mean by this?
We mean providing a free, quality education to every citizen in this country.
You mean public school?
Where they don't have to borrow money in order to have access to opportunities. That's what I believe.
Okay, so you're not talking about the public free education that we provide to people up to 18. You're specifically talking about college.
I think college should be mandatory, and I think college should be paid for by the government as long as people take it seriously and follow through.
Why should college be mandatory?
Mandatory in the same way that public school is mandatory, because we as a nation need educated people in order to stay competitive on the world scale. So it would benefit us, even if we were still capitalist, it would still benefit us to have mandatory higher public education.
So I guess
For example, and same with healthcare.
I've got
Instead
a couple
of
questions here.
yeah.
I've got a couple questions here. So I guess there's two things. First of all, the U.S. in terms of college attendance, there's like a whole bunch of countries that offer free college. That like a higher percentage of the United States, the United States population, a higher percentage of that has a college degree. So it actually appears to be the case that if you have access to college, whether it be free or through loans, that people still have access to college. There doesn't seem to be a massive impact there. And in fact, once you go to college, once you get those loans, the vast majority of loans are held by high income earners. There's a number of charts on this. And so my question is, why should we nationalize college? Why is that a superior system than not mandating people to go to college, but if people want to go to college, having student loans available to them that they can then pay off with the higher income they're going to earn using that education?
If there were student loans with a negative interest rate, I would agree with you. But in terms of a loan so a person can attend college as bestowed upon them by a private institution, I believe that is a crutch for the United States, really. And there's a giant student loan bubble, which at some point is going to burst. Billions of dollars we're talking about here, where people are going to default on this as a political statement, and that will negatively affect, the economy as well. I mean, that is an element of something that could happen.
So
there's medical debt. There's education-based debt.
Sure. So you said you would agree if there was a negative interest rate. So you're saying that you actually take back what you said about the nationalization of the education sector, as long as we just like lower the interest rates of the student loans that we're giving until they're negative.
I mean, in terms of, it depends also what you're going to college for too, I think. But overall, I don't know. It's really hard to go into the specifics of how this works. But overall, in order for people to have complete access to higher education, the government would have to decide to basically handle the finances behind education.
What if there was like a meta-analysis out there that showed that like voucher, what voucher schools are? The voucher programs are, which is like the government, instead of mandating a kid goes to a public school, they give them a voucher, which they then use to go to a private school. You're familiar with this?
Yes.
Okay. So this would be
that. I think that's such a cop-out, I think. And it's like a slap in the face to every employee who works at a public school for a government official to put that forward as a policy. That's just my first knee-jerk reaction, but I'll let you finish.
Sure. Let's say there was like a meta-analysis that demonstrated that over 4 years, kids who went through the voucher program actually did slightly better than kids who went to public school. If this is the case, would you then be in favor of the voucher program and to allow more privatization of education?
Definitely not.
And why is that?
Definitely not, because a lot of private schools also have different standards when it comes to ESL and when it comes to special needs programs. They allow different demographics, different types of students in, ones that require less resources to educate. So there are a lot of details which go into the criticism.
That's not true for vouchers.
No,
this is true for private schools. For private schools, it's true that they do score consistently higher, and part of that is absolutely the economic background of the people who tend to go to private schools. What I'm saying, like when you compare kids like in voucher
the economic background, which is relevant, but there's
I know. Well, when you compare voucher kids who
there's
are
other factors
voucher kids, right? Voucher kids who are the kids who are not wealthy, right? They're the same economic strata as public school kids because they can't afford to go to private schools without the voucher. If they do better by going to a private school, aren't you mostly concerned with just making sure the kids do better?
No, I think the voucher system is just like a ridiculous cop-out. And the way it's presented, it's just acknowledging that we don't fund our public education system enough. And that we don't treat teachers and the people who work at public schools a level of dignity. We need to either to make them want to work there long term. I know in San Francisco, there where I live, there's a massive teacher shortage due to the increasing price of housing here, where it makes it, and also with the policies that the school district puts in place to alienate the teachers and the staff from the decision-making processes, that has led to a shortage of staff and the increase in size of classes. So I do not think the voucher system is a legitimate solution to the housing. To the education system.
So,
I believe it's counterintuitive.
It's a conditional hypothetical.
Because if the private schools were required to have the same exact demographics and the same exact number of kids with ESL and learning disabilities to be at the school as compared with all the public schools in the area, it would not be profitable. It would not be a marketable system.
No. So we're comparing like to like here. So it's a conditional hypothetical.
It's not just the economic.
It's a conditional. It's a conditional.
Status.
I'm not talking about economic. I'm talking. This is, let's say, conditional hypothetical. If it was the case that I showed you a meta-analysis that showed that students who went through a voucher program who otherwise would have gone through public education, those kids over 4 years did slightly better, If it was the case, I'm not saying it is, although it is, but let's just say,
I wouldn't doubt that's the case. But the way the private schools are set up, I mean, how many, how many highly disabled kids do they have at private schools compared with public ones? For example, that's right. That's one thing I need to consider before I read this analysis.
We're not it's like to like comparison. So I'm not talking about like you group the disabled kids or the kids who have special needs along with like other kids, and then that's what brings down the average. What I'm saying is like you have two kids. You got one kid who is like not disabled, not special needs, and you have another kid, same thing. One kid goes to a voucher program, and the other kid goes to public school. If there was a meta-analysis that demonstrated the voucher kid did slightly better, if that was the case, would you then be in favor, because educating kids is important, would you then be in favor of moving forward with the voucher program?
Actually, because the private school would still have more staff to accommodate for the non-disabled kids due to the greater amount of funding they had from not allowing kids with really low functioning autism or severely like ESL limited to go to the school. So no, it still wouldn't be valid.
What if they controlled for that?
Then that would be interesting. If they actually controlled for that, then that would be a thing I'd consider.
That would be when you say that'd be a thing. Wait. When you say does not exist. When you say
such a study does not exist.
Hold on. When you say that'd be a thing you would consider, you are saying then that
I would have to look at this myself and read it myself before I consider the value. If it's
I fully. This is why I've been calling it a conditional hypothetical, because I'm not asking you to commit to the actual.
Do you have such a study that's controlled?
Yes, I'll send.
Are you going to try to find one right now?
No, I have it. I'll send you the meta-analysis in a second. But the reason I've been framing this as a conditional hypothetical is because I'm not asking you. I'm not interested right now in having you accept the empirics of this. I'm just simply asking you, like, where your values lie. If it is the case, the private sector, right? If I could show you studies showing the private sector actually did something better in a particular field, then you would be okay with that field being private, right?
Maybe, possibly.
Okay, how is this Marxian?
In the context of education, though, there's a human element to this as well. So I don't think you're going to be able to produce a study that's controlled with education and the voucher system in this way. But if you can, then I'll read it and consider it.
Okay.
And give it a good faith shake to see if it's valid or not.
In the interest of time, let's find another topic aside from education that maybe you guys want to wrangle a little bit on.
I don't know. I mean, education, healthcare, finances, housing. I think the same principles generally apply. Where if the government nationalizes these things and gives people equal opportunities, there will be a utilitarian net benefit to society. There will be an abolishment of homelessness.
Let's do a little bit more on.
So that on its face
Redbeard.
should
tell us.
be self-evident, I believe.
Just tell us a bit of an idea of what the Marxist socialist policy would envision for housing, and then we'll have Lactoid respond to that.
So one of Marx's mottos was, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. Like that is a general kind of framework that you could start the discussion at. That is how he would have seen it economically.
Oh, wait, is that's the argument for housing? Just
generally, if you want to understand the framework that this is built around, then it's utilitarian based as well as equity based.
Okay. So
with at least major industries that people depend on to survive.
Okay, so if let's say you
had at least those things in the immediate term, with the eventual goal of raising up all people to achieve what you might call self-actualization.
Okay, so if you
in their own respect,
let's say you have somebody who can afford a house or afford their own housing, should they get a free house?
If somebody already has a house, should they receive a free extra house?
Or they have the means. No. I'm saying if somebody has the means to afford a house or to afford to rent an apartment or any of these things,
they shouldn't receive a free one from the government then. No, they shouldn't receive. No, if they already have the money they need to buy a house or to lease a house or to get a mortgage, then no, they shouldn't receive another free house from the government if it was a Marxist system.
Okay, so really we're just talking about like expanding Section 8 to include more people.
No, it's not Section 8. It's giving people the financial literacy and the ability as individuals to get actually like good paying jobs and to not have to rely on predatory financial on the predatory financial industry for support to get a house. That's the bottom line, I would say.
Okay, but you just said like if somebody can afford a house, right? If somebody can afford a mortgage payment or afford rent or afford these things, then they wouldn't get a free one from the government, right? So we're specifically talking about people who can't afford that, right? So people who can't afford
it, why wouldn't they have bought one already?
Well, the vast majority of Americans are not homeless.
I never said they were.
Right, so the vast majority of Americans can afford housing.
No, they can afford to rent most of the time. The vast majority of Americans cannot afford to buy a house.
I'm not talking about buying a house. Like, so I specifically have been saying, like, if you have somebody who can afford a house,
you mean purchasing a house, or you mean renting?
Redbeard. Let me finish, please. If you have somebody who can afford a house or can afford rent, like you have somebody who can afford housing, should they get a free house or free housing from the government?
Which one is it? Is it free housing or a free house? A permanent residence, or is it a rent?
You can answer both.
I don't know. You're shifting now, it seems.
I'm not shifting. I'm asking if you can afford housing, whether that be rent or a house.
Rent?
Yeah.
Okay, so are you aware that what people pay in a mortgage monthly is
I'm very aware.
Not equivalent to what they would pay for renting the same house?
I yes.
Or for renting the same space?
There are different expenses.
Why is that the case? Because a bank considered their credit good enough for them to get a mortgage loan, basically.
So sure, I'm not. I understand how the housing market works.
You're comparing apples and oranges here.
No, I'm not. I understand how the housing market works. What I'm trying to ask you is very simple question. Okay, it's not a trick question at all. If you can afford, if you make enough money, if you can afford rent, and you can afford, let's say you don't want to pay rent, if you could afford a mortgage, right? If you have the credit worthiness to afford a house, if you can afford it, should the government give you a free house or give you a free apartment, or do you just get free housing even if you can afford it?
No, if you can already afford it, why would the government be obligated to subsidize you?
I agree. So the vast majority of Americans can afford housing. Wouldn't you agree?
No, they can afford rent, okay, as a practical measure, so they're not homeless. Okay, the vast majority of Americans, especially millennials and Zoomers, are never going to own a house, dude. It's not the case. Like,
Okay.
it's simply not.
Let's
It's
say,
a fantasy.
Let's say you have somebody who makes enough. Here, I'm going
It's
to
a
leave
pipe dream.
I'm going to leave the housing aside for this. Is confusing you. Okay. If you have somebody who makes enough money to afford rent, should they get a free apartment from the government?
No, not necessarily. If they're employed and they're self-sufficient enough, they can pay for their own shit.
Okay. Yes. You have somebody who makes
If
enough
there's
money.
a homeless person who has a mental problem or they're on drugs and they can't work, the government should probably step in and make sure they don't go crazy in the streets.
Sure. Okay, that's fair enough. So you're saying, if you can afford rent, you shouldn't get a free apartment from the government. Okay. In America currently, you would agree most people, the vast majority of people, can afford housing because our homeless rate is very, very low.
Generally, compared to but yeah, okay, sure.
Okay, so
they can afford temporal rent for the vast majority of people. That's different from being able to afford a house, a permanent residence for you and your family.
I'm not talking about that. I'm saying affording housing and apartments are
housing.
You're trying to
have your cake and eat it too, honestly. Like,
no, I'm not. You would agree an apartment is housing, right?
I guess, yeah.
Okay, great. And you would agree that most Americans can afford housing.
Why is the price for rent at a property often like a third, or often like why is it more expensive than if you had a mortgage though?
I mean, there's a lot of reasons, right? The homeowner has to make improvements. The homeowner has to maintain the property.
It's a property relationship.
Yeah. They have to buy like appliances.
It's a power relationship.
Whenever they have tenants move out and move in, they have to pay for cleaning the property. They have to go after tenants who haven't paid rent. There's a risk there. There's all sorts of reasons. The actual margin on like landlord-tenant relationships is about 4%, 4.5%, right? So it just barely in fact, not even completely beats the market. At four might actually be low. I think it was 14, 4 or 14. I don't fucking remember, but it's definitely not a third, like you were saying. Okay, so there's absolutely profit in there as well. But we're not talking about that. I'm specifically asking you the free housing policy that you're putting forward. Okay, so this would apply to nobody who currently.
Okay, I can clarify.
Redbeard. Let me please. Every time I get to the end of this, you cut me off. Okay. So, and I'm going to look up the actual profit percentage on landlord tenants in a second because I should know that. You're saying that people who can afford housing don't get a free house, and you agree that most Americans can currently afford housing since the vast majority of Americans are housed and the vast minority of Americans are homeless. You're simply talking about, you're not talking about nationalizing housing. You're talking about a government program like Section 8, maybe you would expand Section 8, to house homeless people.
I mean, in the immediate term, I would say it is the government's obligation to deal with the rising homeless population in this country. And the government is either they're obligated to either regulate the price of. I would say they're mostly obligated to deal with the financial industries and the mortgage that manages the mortgage payments and the ownership of the houses itself too. Though it's a duality. It's both, I'd say.
Okay, really quick. So residential properties have an average ROI of about 10.6%, which just barely beats the stock market. Okay, we're talking like a very small beating of the stock market there. It's only a little bit more than 10%. And obviously there's a lot of expenses there as well. My question for you is, so when you talked about nationalizing the housing market, clearly you weren't actually referring to nationalizing the whole housing market.
It doesn't mean making every house that people live in government property. No, that's not. I don't think so. No,
or even the
process of buying and selling houses. And negotiating rent.
No, not just that. You agree that even if you can afford rent, then you shouldn't get a free house from the government, or you shouldn't get free housing from the government. So it's not
also
just
depends it also depends if you can where you can afford rent. I used to be able to afford rent at an SRO in a shithole apartment complex in Chinatown. Okay, I used to technically be able to afford that while being a special education assistant. However, I would not dream of living there personally. I mean, permanently, or trying to raise a family there. So I could technically afford to live there, barely. But is that really equitable, though? As a permanent residence for a person where there's a shared bathroom and kitchen for over a dozen people in the same apartment complex?
Redbeard, I'm trying to find out what your position is because it's very hard to figure it out, right? There's been a couple things that have happened. You talked about first nationalizing housing, and then you agreed, well, no, the government shouldn't pay for your housing if you can afford it. But now it's, well, if you can afford it, but if it's not good enough, then what should the government do?
The government, dude. Okay, simply enough. Okay, the government has an obligation, really, to provide the context and to provide the what's the word? They have an obligation to make sure people can have a living wage and an acceptable living condition, and it's not possible with the way the current financial industry and the way the current housing industry works at all. It's not. Homelessness is rising in the United States. Fewer and fewer people are becoming richer and owning more properties every year. That is the reality of the situation. So the process of buying and selling properties needs to be regulated, if not completely managed by the government, if we're going to reduce the homeless population, if we're going to reduce the levels of poverty in most of the country. The government is going to have a direct role. I don't know specifically, but that would only ever happen if there was a socialist party in charge, I'd say.
Can I ask you, what percentage of America do you think is homeless?
I'm not sure off the top of my head, honestly. I'm not going to fart out a number, but I know homelessness has been rising for as far as I can remember.
Let's say,
I don't know specifically how many people are homeless, though.
Yeah, let's say it was like significant. Let's say it was less than 1%, right? Then you would agree that like nationalizing the entire housing industry would be like pretty ridiculous instead of just like maybe expanding Section 8 to cover more homeless people?
So, okay, the Department of Housing and Urban Development counted about 582,000 Americans experiencing homelessness in 2022.
Yeah, it's significantly less than 1%.
It's less than 1%, yeah, but even so, it's still essentially a public safety and a public health concern, though. I would say, even having that.
So why do you have to nationalize? So why do you have to nationalize? So why do you have to nationalize the housing market to fix that?
You need to nationalize the housing market to make it so real estate developers can't essentially monopolize the price of housing in the United States, as operating as basically a trust, purposefully profiting off of people being homeless, which our government facilitates and allows to happen.
How are they profiting off of people being homeless? I'm just curious.
They're profiting off of scarcity. Housing is scarce, thus people are willing to pay more.
But I mean, not that scarce. I mean, like significantly smaller than 1% of all Americans are homeless, right? So
half 600,000 almost homeless people in the richest country in the world. What's the number of homeless people in the UK?
I don't know. I got a question.
I mean, or France, right? And if you compare that ratio-wise to the total population we have, it's definitely worse than the United States, I'd say.
What would you say if it actually turned out that like overall homelessness has been what if it has like gone down since the early 2000s? What would you say about that?
Well, I know it's been actually going up since the early 2000s, especially during the Great Recession.
Mm-hmm.
It definitely went up since that point onwards, I'd say.
Okay.
Because the financial industries gave out loans to people that they know they wouldn't be able to pay back at rates they knew were unaffordable long term, or at rates they knew were not profitable long term, as part of a more complicated system of like derivatives trading, which went on, which resulted in thousands of evictions, in in my lifetime.
Yeah, no, there was
which
some,
I remember
there was some weird
specifically during the
things-
Great
There was some
Recession.
weird things that happened in 2007.
It wasn't weird. It was
No, there was a couple.
unregulated capitalism, which happened.
No, I mean there was
and
a,
the government had an
no.
obligation to interfere with it.
Yes,
which is
there was
why
a couple things. There was a couple things that so 2007,
laissez-faire capitalism
2007,
is
2007,
an
2008,
imaginary
2007, 2008. There was a pretty complicated situation, but there was a lot of moving parts. But
they gave out loans to people they knew they wanted people to pay back.
You're right. You're right. You're right. They shouldn't have. They should not have done that. You're right. They should not have
you
done
see,
that.
so at that point, instead of evicting and making all these people homeless or make them move into their relatives' houses, the government should have really absorbed that debt and made it so these people would not have to live on the streets at that point. But instead what they did is they bailed these companies out. Right, and didn't really make any long-term. I mean, they tried Dodd-Frank, like I mentioned earlier, to tackle this issue long-term, but I mean that was basically gutted of any actual substance, mostly by the Republicans. Okay, no offense if you vote Republican, but that's what happened. Okay, so it's basically like Chatter said, socialism for the rich is what we have now, with a system of bailouts, with the Keynesian economics going on. So it's inhumane, it's unsustainable, and outdated. It's gonna this inadequacy that we have is gonna facilitate China becoming the world's dominant power due to our inability to look at our system critically and determine really who benefits from what we have.
2007, 2008.
During COVID, even during
COVID.
Wait.
You talked quite a bit. Okay, you talked quite a bit. Okay.
Right, go ahead.
2007, 2008. Right. It was a lot of moving parts. I would argue that the main reason for that was that there was an element of fraud that was existing when it came to rating the specific tranches of housing bonds. Right. And if they actually had been rated accurately, then you would not have seen what you saw because you wouldn't have had a bubble, right? You wouldn't have had a housing bubble because people would have known not to invest in shit investments, right? Which is quite literally what you saw. It's a classic bubble. Why couldn't you simply put in a law enforcing specific anti-fraud regulation, let's say, or anti-fraud statutes? It wouldn't, you could criminally go after people for fraud.
Republican Party.
Hold on. You could criminally go after people for fraud. Why couldn't that be a reasonable solution as opposed to nationalizing the housing market because we're worried? Yeah, and nationalizing the housing market didn't happen. So we're both talking about things that we're both talking about things that like would be good ideas. I don't think that you have to nationalize I don't think you have to nationalize the entire housing market. And it seems like you would almost agree because you agreed with me because you agreed with me
that the entire housing market immediately, but at least major parts of it.
No, because you agreed with me that if you can afford your own housing, the government should not provide you free housing. You agreed with me when I said that. So you're only talking about
I said if you can afford to buy a house.
That is not what you said.
That's what I said.
That is not what you said.
I never admitted that if you live in a slum, right, that's not livable housing for anybody. It really isn't.
I said if you can afford rent.
It's a legacy of segregation.
What are you talking about? I'm talking about if you can afford housing. This is literally what you said. If you can afford housing, if you can afford rent, if you can afford a house, and let's just say of living quality. Whatever the fuck that means. If you can afford to
rent a shack out in a dude's backyard, is that housing?
So in every state except for Arkansas, no, it couldn't be housing because there are regulations of what is considered housing.
Arkansas, really? So in Arkansas, it's legal for people to live in a shack in somebody's backyard?
It's questionable. Okay, Arkansas is the only state that doesn't have a warrant of habitability. Okay, every other state does. Sure. Every single other state does, which means you are legally not allowed to rent out an apartment unless it is considered habitable by the government. And so again, my question is, if we have this implied warrant of habitability in 49 states, okay, the vast majority of the American population, okay, if we have that warrant, and in fact, let's say we even apply this to Arkansas, maybe that can be the big fucking political move, okay, and now habitable in order to rent to somebody, in order to rent to somebody, like the apartment has to be habitable under law, okay. My question for you is, so the homeless population is some fraction of a percent of the American population. You're not talking about nationalizing housing. You're talking about beefing up Section 8 so those specific homeless people are no longer homeless. That's what you're proposing.
There might be an immediate scenario with a program that is similar to Section 8 to immediately get people off the streets, and also in conjunction with allowing them access to healthcare, mental health services, and social workers to stabilize their life. There might be a transitional period there with a lot of people, especially with mental illness and drug addictions, which compromise a disproportionate amount of homeless people as compared with the general population. Right? Sure. And the government might start a national financial institution that is publicly owned that can give low interest rate loans to people so they can long term have an access to housing as regulated by a government agency that's democratically monitored and managed. Okay, those two things are practical solutions, what we have going on here. The reason it isn't happening is a lack of political will to do it. It is a political decision that we allow homelessness to exist in the United States. It's a political decision we allow people to live without health care in the United States, where people have to do teeth removals in their garage with a set of pliers. It's ridiculous. It's absurd that we're the richest country in the world by many degrees, and people just are so demented and self-consumed that we're willing to let these people live in the streets. Okay, that's what I believe. And Citizens United Supreme Court decision, a lot of other political factors go into this, where I don't know, where corporations can essentially by politicians. It's not technically corruption, such as through the super PAC system, but even so, even if it's not technically corruption because it's legal for these donations and for this moral bribery to happen. Okay, you want to talk about morality? Is it moral for a politician to accept millions of dollars from special interest groups that sways their opinions? On these issues? I say no.
Yeah, I don't. I
say no.
I would actually ban public representatives like politicians from being able to be invested in the stock market or receiving.
Well, that would require a revolution to happen. Practically, realistically, that would require a revolution to happen.
So
that's a pipe dream if you think it can happen.
No, okay. I don't think so. I don't think it is. But even if it was, the case, then at the very least, my revolution of like a few reasonable changes is going to be much easier than your revolution of nationalizing the entire housing market, of nationalizing education, even if it's even in the cases in which it's not better, of nationalizing industries that actually are better off private just by empirical metrics because of some sort of Marxian theory. I think that's that's going to be less palatable to most people than just
if you believe in regulating,
politicians
right,
shouldn't be able to have financial interests in the specific things they're regulating. I think that's reasonable.
So if you believe in making more regulations to monitor and manage these industries by the government, would you recommend that people vote Democrat since they're the party that generally pushes for these things?
No, absolutely not. Do not vote Democrat. Vote Republican. 2024. Whoever they put up, if it's against Biden, trust. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Duke. Sorry, my bad.
I just, it's my moral imperative to stop anyone from recommending voting for.
I would say if the Democratic Party is intelligent and if they're not masochists, okay, they would really start looking out for the downtrodden of this country and stop taking the side of the ultra rich
Speaking
that
of
are
the
trying to
downtrodden,
monopolize and turn our
the-
country into an oligarchy, monopolize the resources we need to survive.
Yes, speaking of the
Okay.
downtrodden, our poor audience members who have had enough, I think.
Right.
This has been a beautiful 2 hours or so of debate. Let's transition here into a closing statement. Your closing statement can focus primarily on part two, but of course, you are more than welcome to talk about both in your closing statement, since we are focused overall on whether or not Marxist socialism is good for the world. I'll give you a few seconds in your head to think about how you want to close. While you're thinking about that, I'll just say thank you to everybody for sticking around for this full debate. As always, please invite someone who's not in the server already to help grow it. If you want to debate in the future, please shoot me a DM, even if you're not sure precisely what you'd want to debate. Even if you don't have someone to debate against, that's okay. That's my job. I can help you find somebody. Even if you think that you can't debate at the level of somebody else, that's also okay. I can do a matchmaking of sorts, like a video game with you. So please send me a DM. I can get that established. Even people who have debated before, I'm happy to have you debate again if you're interested. So shoot me a DM, or you can type in that looking for debate channel. Also, if you want to subscribe to the server, that would be amazing as well. Click the server stop button. There are a few options there for you. And lastly, of course, as we go into these closing statements, I will also do a quick question and comment period. So if anyone has any questions or comments, also please DM me. It's the easiest way for me to keep track of them. DM me any questions or comments. Super supporters get priority questions and comments. All right. Oh, and of course, vote Dem in 2024. They just crushed like every fucking election everywhere across the entire United States today. It's fucking incredible. Like, stay mad, Republicans. Got dumpstered. All right, so out all the way, Lactoid, hit us with your closing statement.
Yeah, I'm going to repeat what I said at the beginning, which is that Marxism is morally evil. The shortcomings that were affectionately referred to somewhat by Redbeard, I think, are a lot more than just shortcomings. I think shortcomings is the nicest way to put it. I like to say that communism is evil in theory and it's evil in practice, right? The concept of from each according to his ability to each according to his need is a fundamentally parasitic understanding of the world. Not only is it morally evil and has consistently been morally evil in practice and will consistently be morally evil in practice, but it's also just stupid. Just effectively stupid in terms of efficiency, in terms of productivity, in terms of every measurement you can think of. A Marxian sort of material dialectic view of the world, a planned economy, a rejection of market economics consistently fails. And I think we demonstrated that here today. Redbeard, all love to you. But the actual ideology of Marxism, I think, is particularly pernicious. I think it tends to lead to stagnation, to murder, to authoritarianism, to the collapse of civil liberties, and to generally just a world that I think most people would disagree with. And that's not even just me talking as a libertarian. I think most people would know, when they see the numbers and when they look at history and they look at the facts, would have to agree with me on that. Even if they don't agree with my more libertarian prescriptions. Even a social democrat or a left-winger could look at Marxian theory and be repulsed, as they should be. I really appreciate the opportunity, Duke, to have me on. Thank you, Redbeard, for arguing with me. You could find me at Lactoid TV on Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube if you're interested in hearing more content like this. Thank you.
Based. Redbeard, what do you got for us?
So in terms of what I believe is morally evil, I believe that it is morally evil to charge people exorbitant amounts for commodities and services they require to survive. And I believe that the system we have now, capitalism, and especially American capitalism, is dependent on a world trade network with many other countries that really do not give human rights much credence, or they don't give much credence to the notion of political equality, and Marxism is the best vehicle for examining the current society we have, for examining history, and for planning out a brighter future for the rest of the world. Unless you want more people like Elon Musk to pop up, who are going to end up creating essentially an oligarchy running the United States. Okay, you are obligated to vote Democrat if you want even a chance at the existence of the American Republic, okay, against this parasitic, I believe, morally evil group of far-right capitalists who want the United States to have a government system like Russia has currently with the Russian Federation. I believe that socialism, if we adopt elements of it in order to accommodate our least to raise the standard for the poorest of the poor in the United States, I believe that will only benefit our standing on the world scale by showing that we're willing to put our money where our mouth is when we say that all men were created equal. In the Declaration of Independence, as written by Thomas Jefferson, a phrase that many countries have taken to heart in their struggle for freedom around the world. As opposed to being born into wealth, which perpetuates itself at a certain level.
All right. Well, with that, that'll conclude another wonderful debate. We solved it. Everything's been solved. We understand.
Yeah, I had fun though, actually. I had a good time doing this. This is the first actual formal debate I've had about Marxism in like a really long time. So thank you for sparring with me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for the time.
Yeah,
and then Duke, we are, I said 9:30. We are well over time, so I can take a few questions, but I mean, I really do gotta go.
I'll try to do one.
I'm exhausted too. I came here straight after work today. I haven't even showered.
I got to get up at 5 for something relatively important. So
no problem.
If anybody wants to talk about this, you guys. Yeah, I'm a typical Marxist. I work at a butcher. Even I'm covered in blood and grime.
You are a typical Marxist, I guess. Yeah.
Don't walk into it.
Oh, that was a good one. That was a good one.
All right,
good one. I handed that to you.
I will lightning round a few of the questions here. So we'll go crazy, snappy, fast, even if it's not your perfect answer. Admiral says, Redbeard said Marxism is one of the best lenses for understanding history. What are some Marxist historians that you've read and found incisive?
Pierre Brau is great. I've personally read a lot of works by Leon Trotsky, who I hold in very high regard as the best theorist and the best proponent of Marxism in the history of the Russian Revolution. Leon Trotsky wrote the history of the Russian Revolution. If anybody actually wants to learn about this, he was there and participated in all this and has primary sources. So him, yeah. All
right, Trader to Redbeard, do you accept the labor theory of value?
Yes, fundamentally I do. I believe that there are there's a human element to economics. There's a human element to society where inventors and creative people have their role, and they deserve to be compensated if they put a certain amount of time towards an invention that helps people. But overall, I believe the labor theory of value is the primary law that I would ascribe to with economics.
Okay. Sorry, I haven't seen
primary, the most significant one.
I expected
this is from Boston. In Commiesville, can I build a house or even a whole neighborhood myself, assuming I can trade my tokens for lumber/materials?
I suppose so, but I think that the idea would be for just the public and the people that we would democratically vote and to run the government would just oversee these projects. If it's a truly a directly democratic system, if there is like a corrupt person that takes advantage of their position, they should be able to be recalled immediately. That's how the Soviets in Russia originally worked. Okay, that's how. During the Civil War, that's what happened. So
wait, dude, hold on, Redbeard. That wasn't the question. The question was, let's say Lawson goes out in like the woods and builds a house or builds like a couple houses. Should somebody just come take those extra houses from him?
I don't know. I mean, I like Ted Kaczynski, where he builds like a log cabin in the woods.
Yes, people. Yeah, he goes and builds like he's a builder. Let's say he builds like 4 or
Does
5
the government
houses.
expropriate them? Why would they feel compelled to expropriate him if it's a house in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the woods that he built himself? I'd say maybe no. That would be maybe a possession as opposed to productive property at that point. If he personally built this house himself in the middle of the woods and didn't exploit anybody to build it, then maybe in that specific scenario he should be allowed to keep it.
What if he had like 5 friends and they all built the housing and they all agreed to like split the rent equally?
That's fair enough. I have no issue with that.
Okay, so you're okay with landlords as long as they're co-ops.
A cooperative living situation where people construct the houses themselves and democratically run their management, I don't see a problem with that. If that exists today, that would be a good thing. I think if that's a model that's spread widely, and especially if there was a government financial institution that could fund such projects, that would be a good thing.
What can I do?
All
I'm
right.
sorry. Can I ask one more question?
Go for it. Yeah.
What makes something what makes an agreement exploitative?
That's a good question. I mean, a big part of Marxism is actually like the concept of alienation, where people are compelled by circumstances to make actions which are contrary to their own interests. As a worker, why would I feel compelled to do any more work than is completely necessary for me to stay employed? Why would I be obliged to? That's a rough kind of question to how to put it. Like child labor, that's an obvious one that's exploitative because they're not old enough to really advocate for themselves.
Yeah, I agree. But like, let's say let's say I want to cut down some trees, but I don't have a chainsaw. But my friend has a chainsaw, and I borrow his chainsaw for $10. Is that exploitative?
No.
Okay. Why? So why is that not exploitative? Didn't he just profit off of me needing the chainsaw to go cut down trees?
Yeah, but it was completely voluntary. He wasn't coerced or forced by the circumstances to rent you the chainsaw.
It was completely voluntary.
In that specific scenario, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Mm. Okay, just a few more left. From Inky for Redbeard. Did you get your cheesesteak sandwich?
No, I'm starving. Like I told you guys, I came here straight after work because we're short-staffed. And I had no time to even shower before I came on this debate.
No worries.
Yeah.
Finally got one for Lactoid. Thank the Lord. I was hoping at least there's one. And it's like a try-hard one. Okay. Okay. You said that the Judenfrage, which is the Jewish question, they wrote it in German. You said that the Jewish question from Marx was anti-Semitic. But how do you reconcile this with Marx's proclamation on the DN Emancipation Resolution in London in 1852?
Okay. I'll be honest for a second. I'm unfamiliar with that proclamation, okay? Yeah, I don't know what that proclamation is, and I don't know if that proclamation was an apology for calling Jews hucksters.
I can tell you.
Oh, sure.
It was the D's nuts Emancipation Resolution.
Damn, that's some sick shit.
Another one.
Didn't see that coming.
Week. Every fucking week.
You got 2 W's.
Walked into that one.
Are you really going to keep going? This isn't fair at this point. This is actually exploitation. You're using me for W's, and I don't like it. I'm starting to agree with Redbeard on this now.
You did not consent. That's very.
Walked right into that one. Have a sick fucking burn. Just like when you made fun of me for being a butcher, right?
All communists are covered in blood.
I don't really feel bad for you.
It was I appreciate you being exploited for a moment there. That's okay.
Thank you.
All right. That is all the actual questions I believe that I have. Let me double check. Oh, actually, okay. Sorry. These are not memes, but they are both the Redbeard. So, Lactoid, if you want to leave, you have my blessing. If you want to stick around, here's 2 answers. You're welcome to as well. Your call.
I'll balance if they're both to Redbeard. Just wanted to quickly again, thank you for having me on. Thank you, Redbeard, for engaging.
Of course.
Redbeard for engaging with me. Big shout out to everyone here in Everyday Debate.
Absolutely,
you're doing cool stuff. Also, Big shout out to my audience for sticking around. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, before you leave, very quick. This is it's totally unrelated, but it's not a trap question. It's our classic question. I think I asked you this last time, but I'll do it anyway, which is our alien question. Do you think it is more likely than not that somewhere in the universe there exist aliens that are as intelligent or more intelligent than human beings?
I believe I kind of think it's like almost inevitable in the universe.
So he can go to bed.
I actually think I think I agree, only because, like, with the vastness of the universe, I see life as almost just like a sort of natural phenomena, kind of like diamonds. And it does seem hard to believe. It's entirely speculation, but it does seem like hard to believe that nowhere in this vastness there aren't the conditions, similar conditions that we have here, that could also generate life, and that one of these planets has some kind of intelligent life. If you had to make me bet money on it, I would bet that there's alien life out there, this intelligent alien life.
Cool. All right. Have a great night, Lactoid. Thanks for debating with us.
Yep. Have a great night.
All right. The last two questions were also to Redbeard. They are from Auntie. Question number 1. People have ends and employ means to achieve those ends. One of the reasons to study economics is to understand what institutions, for example, markets, help us cooperate and allocate goods and services to the most valued use. How in a socialist economy do you hope to allocate these resources, goods and services, absent the market process and the price systems? How does this overcome the knowledge problem? If you believe that you can, why haven't you written a paper on this and won a Nobel Prize in economics?
Well, okay, so even Marx acknowledged that capitalism has had a very progressive role in developing the Western world, especially out of medieval style and religiously based government systems, which where there was a variety of different medieval style governments, but essentially the right of private property and the right of the rights of the individual as being put forward over are legitimately historically progressive things, as compared with the societies that we've seen up until, say, the American Revolution or the English Revolution, where capitalism was made the order of the day, or the French Revolution is probably the number one capitalist revolution, you might call it that, which enabled the rights of the individual over the rights of an immutable sovereign. So historically, capitalism and markets, markets have existed before capitalism, but the right of the individual to freely exchange his goods and services in that market is a progressive thing. The issue becomes when that wealth he gains starts perpetuating itself with the commodity money cycle that Adam Smith or John Locke would have talked about in like, say, The Wealth of Nations or so. But with the rise of industrial world capitalism, okay, that itself, it really only benefits people in a couple countries, realistically, at the expense of most of the world. So there's a limit to markets. There has to be a certain level of democracy in the allocation of resources. As of today, I would say that's on the order of the day, especially given that, I don't know. Is that too vague, or I don't know?
Well, we'll roll with it for now. It might be a post-debate chat as well. Okay, switching over to Paul. Paul had a question. Do you believe that the USSR became more Marxist after de-Stalinization?
No, I don't think it became more or less Marxist during de-Stalinization. I believe that Stalin legitimately believed that what he was doing was consistent with Marxism. However, he made such big revisions to it, including the socialism in one country theory, which ran contrary to Marxist internationalism, which aimed to destroy barriers between nations and allow free exchange of people, goods, and ideas around the world. Stalin believed in socialism in one country, as opposed to Lenin and Marx and Trotsky, which believed that nations were the nation state, the modern nation state, is structured in a way that benefits the small minority of the capitalist class.
Okay.
And this expresses itself through national struggles.
Cool. I'll do Paul's other question as well. Oh yes, two more technically. Classic Paul question. Paul would like to know, as Redbeard, are my balls supposed to hurt when I fart?
Good question. I don't think so.
Okay. And his last question, are you still in your bachelor's program?
I have not finished college. No.
Okay.
And I kind of don't really plan on it either, honestly. I mean, I'm 28 years old. I don't know.
Fair enough. All right. Well, Anthony has another question, but I think what I'm going to do is just going to encourage everyone who wants to continue talking to go to the post-debate chat.
Yeah, I'm going to leave now. I'm going to dip. So I had fun.
Okay.
I'm going to read the last comment in chat.
Cool.
But yeah, I had fun here. Thank you all for listening. Hope you all have a good night.
Not a problem.
Free Palestine. Bye.
Palestine. Good night, guys.
So, what'd you guys think? Oh my, oh boy. Yeah, so that was something. I had so many fucking stats. I prepare because I didn't know what what I was preparing for. I didn't know who this was, so I had so many stats. I couldn't use half of them because there was like a tree that I was trying to go down, and we never got to the end of that tree. That was not someone who cared about stats. I think he specifically said that. I said because he said he doesn't care about the empirics of things, where he doesn't think the empirics of things are going to be helpful, and so that threw me off. I was like, okay, well, I have respect for him after he said he was a butcher. True. I butchered a deer on Sunday, and I can tell you, butchering an animal is, that is a pain in the ass. So people who butcher animals daily, I mean, that's hard work. That's absolutely hard work, and I can respect that. Do I respect Marxism and those ideas that were being expressed? No, I don't. But that is the butchering of humans, unfortunately. But some good work being a butcher. That's something I can respect. I am 2 followers away from 350, and I have been 2 followers away for like 2 weeks, and I'm just on the edge of my seat. I'm almost there. It's like edging, right? It's like it's like so close, so close. And then it'll happen though. It'll happen. Look, the longer it takes, the better it'll be, right? That's the rule. Hell yeah. Okay. I got to go to bed. I have important obligations very, very, very early in the morning tomorrow. So I'm probably up too late anyway, but it is what it is. I was glad I was able to put on some content for you guys. It's an important discussion. Shitting on Marxism, always a fun time. Always, and not only is it a fun time, but you also feel like you're doing good in the world, right? It's like charity work, really. So it was a good time. It was a good time. If you liked what I had to say today, or you like debates, or you like any of this stuff, please consider giving me a follow or just hanging around, coming by in the future. Always loving to have you. If you guys liked Everyday Debate, that was the server that I had that debate on. That's Duke's server. We've sparred in the past. He's a very bright guy, and I think that if you ever argue with him, he'll definitely give you a run for your money. So I think that's always important as well. It's important to argue with people. It's important to stay on your toes, because at the end of the day, battles are no longer fought with sticks. Battles are fought with words and ideas, and that's what we do here. Fighting the good fight, fighting the good battle, pushing back against the leftists, which, it's the categorical imperative. It's morally good by definition. What I'm going to go ahead and do now that we got through all that, I am going to raid on out. And I'm going to go ahead, she is streaming, I'm going to raid on out into Zonia Dead. Zonia's a friend of mine, and hopefully she's doing something interesting. Thanks.
Can't actually be defined in any way, shape, or form. Just end of story.